And welcome back to Paranormal TV. I am Ben Emlyn-Jones, and we return again after a little break, just having a little refresher there. And I'm pleased to say we are joined by Neil's Paranormal Peep Show co-host, Andrew Chaplin. Hi, Andrew.
Hello, Ben. How are you doing? It's good to be here.
I'm glad you joined us, mate. Thank you very much. I hope the Halloween activities went well.
Yeah, I've been running around like a headless chicken, sticking up signs in pubs all over Hertfordshire. Absolutely manic at the moment.
That's the place to go if you want a good Halloween party, obviously.
It is indeed.
And we still have with us, of course, Neil Geddes-Ward, and we have Marcus Allen and Scott Henderson. And we're going to continue with the subject we were talking about before, and that is the Apollo moon landings, almost 50 years old. But we don't have all the answers yet. So what I'll do is, I know that Scott and Marcus want to go through some more of the evidence, so I'll let you guys take it away.
Okay. Let's just, we've got two photographs here. On the right-hand side, this is Apollo 11. This is Buzz Aldrin descending the ladder from the lunar lander, which had just 6 hours earlier had landed on the lunar surface. And he's being photographed by Neil Armstrong. A couple of points. Look at his right foot. His right foot is not touching the rung of the ladder.
It's like he's jumping on the ladder.
He's jumping it. Well, he's certainly moving. Even in 1/6 gravity, he would be moving. But the camera has recorded the detail very clearly, which indicates that either the camera shutter speed was high enough to record the image without blurring, which is what you'd get if you were trying to photograph a moving object. And obviously Neil Armstrong is not moving the camera because everything else is properly in focus. The point about his foot being not on the rung is that his body is moving, but it's not blurred. And if you then look at a wider shot of the picture, you'll see that his left foot is stuck out at a ridiculous angle. Now, imagine yourself on the top of your garage. You've just finished cleaning the leaves out of the gutter, and you're coming down the ladder about 10 foot up in the air. Is that really how you would approach the ladder?
Yeah,
with one foot stuck out in the air, so it can't support you if you miss with your right foot. And what is that highlight of light on the heel of his boot? We're told that it's a very glossy boot because it's just come out of its wrapper because he's wearing overshoes. And some people have pointed out that the photograph of Neil Armstrong's spacesuit on display in the National Air and Space Museum or wherever it's on display doesn't show these ribbed soles of the feet. The point is these are overshoes designed to ensure that they could grip on the dusty surface of the moon. But the highlight of light on his heel would appear to be produced by a point source of light, because this whole side of the lunar lander is in shadow. As you can easily see on the later photographs, there we have on the left-hand side there, we can see that the lunar lander is in shadow, because you can see the shadows cast by the legs of the lander.
The sun is behind the vehicle, you can see quite clearly.
Yeah. So Buzz Aldrin is in shadow at this point. But the point is that the directly illuminated surface of the moon behind him is not overexposed, as you would expect if you were trying to get detail in a shadow, at a person who's standing in shadow area. On this particular film, the Kodak Ektachrome film, which does not have a very high tolerance of exposure latitude.
You can see all the details, you see all the little rocks behind him. And
yes, you can see all the rocks. You could say it's maybe half a stop overexposed, but that's the most. If you overexpose it by 3 or 4 stops, as some people have suggested, the whole photograph would be washed out with no image you could see. What you've got here is a fake photograph taken under studio conditions here on Earth, not on the moon.
So there was actually, like you get in a studio, you would have more than one light source. You'd have people with flash bulbs or big reflectors or a secondary light to actually balance the contrast out.
Yes,
instead of... Because it's interesting, because I know that this has been tested several times. The Mythbuster tested it. They wanted to claim, Mythbusters, that this was really shot on the moon. It wasn't shot in a studio under artificial light. So they actually recreated the image. They recreated the image in a studio under artificial light. It's actually the only person who actually tried to do an honest experiment with this was Jarrah White, an Australian Apollo researcher. He did it in sunlight, and he encountered the very problem that you're talking about, Marcus.
Yeah, that you will get overexposure, because photographic film can record incredible detail, but you have to get the exposure right for it to do so. This is not a digital image, so anybody under the age of about 50 looking at this image thinking it's a digital image, it's not. It's a film image, and they record light very differently. Photographic film records light very differently from digital images. I won't go into the detail of it, but it does, believe me.
That's
but
so...
now, if it's not overexposed in the background, and the explanation offered by those people who support NASA's contention that they landed a man on the moon, is that this illumination in the shadow area is from the special reflective properties of the lunar surface, which has little glass globules or little glass balls as a result of meteorite impact, which reflect light. Yes, of course they do, but not sufficient light. Because if you look at the moon, a full moon, you can look at it quite comfortably with eyes. You don't need sunglasses, but you can't look at the sun. The sun is extremely powerful, and the light reflected from the moon originates from the sun. If you measure it, the reflections of the lunar surface are about 8% of the light that hits the lunar surface. That is not sufficient to provide the illumination we see in this photograph.
On the subject of digital image, the NVIDIA graphics card design company actually did a digital reproduction of this.
Yes, they did.
In which they actually claim that it is actually possible to actually have this effect using just sunlight. But I know that some people have looked at their data, and it turns out that it's not the evidence they claim it is.
It's interesting you mention Jarrah White, because he was the very first person to, as he said, he called foul. He's Australian. I call foul on this film, he said. This is the NVIDIA film, which tries to show that, of course, they could recreate this image exactly the way it's shown in the photograph. And he said, yes, they can recreate the reflection off the lunar surface if the reflectivity of the lunar surface is set high enough. He said, what is the reflectivity of the lunar surface that NVIDIA used in their film? And they wouldn't tell him. They wouldn't say what the reflection was. So he actually used Photoshop, which can analyze the RGB settings in any section of a photograph, and found that the reflective properties that they were using was over 40%. Well, of course it would illuminate a shadow area at 40%.
Yeah. But then it's a shame that NVIDIA wouldn't be more transparent, because the first rule of science is that you present all your evidence properly for people to examine. It's called peer review. Exactly. So why were they being so cagey?
Because they were using power review.
They were lying.
Well, Marcus, out of interest, the backpacks that the astronauts are using, how many hours would they be out and about on the moon? If we're to believe the official story, how many hours of oxygen would they have in those backpacks?
Right, on Apollo 11, they were Neil Armstrong spent the longest time on the lunar surface. It's 2 hours, 21 minutes.
Right.
On Apollo, sorry?
If somebody's going scuba diving, how many hours do they get out of those tanks? Do you know that?
About 45 minutes.
45 minutes. And they reckon they got 2 hours, 20 minutes.
2 hours, 20 minutes on Apollo 11, but they did even better on Apollo 17. It was 7 hours, 56 minutes.
Wow.
Now, I think any scuba diver would love to have a scuba tank that he could use for 7 hours underwater.
So the question is, why don't they?
Well, because they never existed in the first place.
There are scuba tanks. They're called rebreathers, which are actually very similar to a spacesuit. They operate in a very similar way to a spacesuit rather than the simple aqualung that they often use. But they can't get an endurance of 7 hours. No way.
And also, in the Apollo backpacks, did they have anything? Well, they must have had the cooling system in there as well as the oxygen, surely. I mean, other things.
Oh yes, they did, because the range of temperature on the lunar surface is 500 degrees Fahrenheit. From minus 100, let's go to centigrade, minus 150 centigrade, which is colder than anywhere here on Earth, if you're standing in the shadow, to plus 150 degrees centigrade, higher than the boiling point of water, if you're standing in the sun. And because there's no atmosphere, if you move from sun to shadow, the temperature change is instant.
So did they have anything else in the backpack? So we're thinking oxygen cooling system. Is there anything else they would have had in the backpacks?
Yeah, they had radios in order to communicate with each other and with Houston, because they were transmitting from their backpack to the lander, which was then relayed on to Houston. Not 40,000 miles across space.
And of course, the radios they would have been using, they wouldn't have been like our mobile phones. This is 1960s and 70s technology, isn't it? This is quite clunky stuff.
It's extremely clunky stuff. There are just so many anomalies when you start to look at it from a scientific point of view.
Can I ask a question? So I'd like to ask another question about the photographs, if that's okay. Maybe Scott can chime in on this as well. One of the theories to explain the effects of the photographs, that is, they are studio-like lighting effects, is because the photographer himself acted as a reflector with his big white suit. Is that possible?
That's what Marcus stands for, the photographic anomalies.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's the expert on those.
Scott, could you move slightly closer to the mic in some way, or turn?
Yeah, I turned mine down. I can turn it back up again if you like.
Yeah, because you're a bit faint at the moment.
So Marcus, I mean, they are big white, they're bright white suits, it's like a cricketer's suit or something. Is it possible for that to actually act inadvertently as a makeshift platform?
Not to the extent that we're shown there, because that was the contention when the video.
Okay, that's some interference there. Scott, can you mute?
Yes. Can you hear me better now?
We can hear you better now. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, in the film put out by NVIDIA, they claimed that Neil Armstrong's spacesuit, as we see here in these pictures, this is Al Bean on Apollo 12, but it's a similar spacesuit, that spacesuit would be sufficient to reflect enough light into the shadow of the lunar lander to illuminate Buzz Aldrin. If that was the case, you would expect any halfway photographer here to just get somebody in a white coat to wander around and act as a reflector, and they don't, because it doesn't work. There isn't enough reflective surface to do so. That's why you see them holding great big sheets of silver paper to act as the reflector. So just to go back to this recreation of this photograph by the Mythbusters, the Russian filmmakers over in Moscow decided to recreate the Mythbusters show. And they did it because they wanted to bust the Mythbusters. And what they found that the Mythbusters had done, in order to get enough illumination into the shadow area of the lander to show up the astronaut, they had to wear white coats.
I thought that was just them trying to be sophisticated.
As Jamie said, and when challenged by Jarrah White about the whole Mythbusters program, Jamie said, "Well, it's not science, it's entertainment."
Well, that's it. Says it in a nutshell, doesn't it? That's the whole problem.
Exactly.
Mark, what are we looking at in terms of the left-hand video? Okay.
Someone's mic is crackling quite badly.
Ben.
I'll mute. I'll just mute.
Okay.
Sorry, Andy, go again.
Marcus, what's that piece of kit? The left-hand image we're looking at. That piece of kit at the bottom.
Right, left-hand image. That's the little transporter trolley thing that they carried all their kit around in.
Okay, like tools and things like that.
Yeah, a sort of golf cart type thing.
Okay.
They sort of towed around with them. But the point about these two pictures, which shows, say, Al Bean on Apollo 12, is look at the horizon in relation to the astronaut. Same astronaut, Al Bean, photographed by Pete Conrad. On the same roll of film, these two pictures have one other picture between them.
Yeah.
We select these two to show the position of the camera that took the photograph. Where was that camera? We're told it was mounted on his chest, like we see on the left-hand picture.
Yeah.
If that's the case, a photograph taken of another astronaut of approximately the same height would show what we see on the left, i.e. the camera would be pointing more or less straight at the photographer.
Yeah.
And if you see the photographer who took the picture, who is reflected in the visor, he's not holding his camera above his head, which is where you would, where the photograph on the right would appear to show, because you're looking down on top of the camera, you're looking down on top of his helmet, you're looking down on top of his backpack. Now, if you compare that with the left-hand picture, you don't see the top of his helmet, you don't see the top of his backpack, and you certainly don't see the top of the camera.
So they've been very, very helpful here, haven't they? Because the visor is so reflective, you can actually see the photographer, and you can confirm exactly where his actual position when he's taking these photographs.
Exactly, yeah, which is quite helpful, because by looking at it just as a photograph, not as a record of a scientific achievement of man landing on the moon. Forget all that. This is just a photograph. Where was the camera?
Could it be, Marcus, that in the visor of the man on the right, it looks like his left hand has got the camera, but it looks like the camera is being slightly raised? Is that correct?
Yes, his hand will not be right by the camera.
Yeah, there. It looks like his left hand.
Yes.
Is his left hand holding the camera slightly higher or not?
He's holding the trigger.
He's holding the trigger. So
yes.
Is the camera locked in place? Does it detach, or is it completely locked in place and that's it?
No, it's locked in place.
Yeah.
As you can see in both of those photographs, you can see the camera is locked onto his chest.
Yeah, and there's no way of detaching it. There's no pin that detaches it at all.
No, there's no pin. But there's if you look below the camera, you see the little black stick. That's the pistol grip.
Okay. Yeah.
Right down there.
That. Yeah.
So
it's a curious one. It's a curious one. I mean, one of the arguments that Peter Bassett raised was maybe they're on a hill. Maybe the person taking the shot is angling down from a hill. What would you say to that?
Well, where's the hill?
Yeah, I'm looking at the horizon and it doesn't.
I mean, suddenly you've got this whacking great hill, because it's going to be quite a big hill, because he's quite close to the subject. The photographer is relatively close to the subject. Maybe about 10, 12, 15 feet away from him. Because don't forget, he's using a wide-angle lens.
Most likely neither one of these two cameras took the photograph, because it would mean they would have to change magazines on both of them to have the two images on the same magazine.
Yeah.
But also, these
which means they'd have to detach both their cameras, change up the magazine so one guy could take the other person's photograph and keep it on the same magazine.
And just make sure you don't get any dust in it while you do it, because because obviously you can't take your gloves off to do it, because you've got to wear your full spacesuit, and they're a bit dusty because they've been picking up rocks and
more than dust. That's wet.
It is. Yes.
Also, these two pictures, I believe, were taken quite close to each other, which means they were in the same location. So if he's on a hill in the right-hand picture, you can see quite clearly that on the left-hand picture there is no hill.
Yeah, we see that's the explanation that is offered by people who support NASA, because they've got to come up with some halfway logical explanation. And if you say, well, the photographer was standing on a hill, to many people that makes a bit of sense. But the point is that if you're going to say that, you've got to prove there was a hill there, or a crater, or some other explanation. Because the astronauts, assuming they were on the moon, which they weren't, but let's assume for the moment they were, these guys are in considerable danger. If they'd tripped or fallen over or punctured their spacesuit in any way, they're dead, toast, end of story. Body on the moon, getting back to Earth. So they're going to take a degree of care, and this is not what you see when they're bouncing around in the videos, which are taken at the same time. They're sort of jolly, they're even singing little songs as if it's...
And they're playing golf.
And they're playing golf. I mean, how stupid is that? What a ridiculous thing to even think of.
I've never come across the wet knee. This is very interesting. Okay, so playing devil's advocate, could it be a leak in the cooling system? Could he have wet himself, peed himself in some ways?
Not that far down.
Well, I mean, it could have dribbled. Like, for instance, presumably there's some way of catching...
You're astronaut.
Presumably there's some way of catching pee. If they're out for 2 hours... 2 hours, 20 minutes. Presumably they will need to pee at some point. Presumably there's some kind of tubing system that deals with that. Could that have leaked at all or anything like that?
It's giant nappies they're using.
Oh, right. Okay.
But Scott has got a very, very good picture showing a wet flag.
Yeah.
Wet flag. Let's have a look at the wet flag.
Can you show us that, Scott?
And
the wet flag?
Yes.
That's on Apollo 17, I think. Is it?
Yeah, Apollo 17.
The Apollo 17 wet flag, I have it in...
I'm getting the distinct feeling we're not going to be too popular amongst NASA.
Oh, look. Here we go. Wet flag.
So, do you want to explain that photo, Scott? Just for people who don't know about it.
Oh, we've lost it. Oh, okay.
I can zoom it right in there.
Oh.
Yeah, so this is from Apollo 17, and I think it's...
You can see it's all drying back.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how you look at that, you can see it is drying back on that edge back in, and it doesn't matter how you look at that. You can even see it's wet up in there. That's fun.
In the red. Yeah.
Okay, playing devil's advocate, what if it somehow had water damage within the lunar lander and they just... Say again?
You are in a vacuum. There are no liquids in a vacuum.
Okay,
So
but it means inside the lunar capsule.
Yeah, inside the capsule. So it's wet inside the capsule. They bring it out onto the lunar surface. What would happen?
There would be no moisture left in it within seconds.
It would just disappear. It would just
At
disappear.
that much of a vacuum, it would just be gone.
Wow.
Is it correct to say that if you took water out into a vacuum in a cup, it just boils away or something? Is that right?
Wouldn't boil away. Not in that vacuum. It'd just be gone.
What, evaporates?
You are in infinite vacuum.
Okay, it floats off somewhere.
Even if you drop the pressure in just a bell jar like they do in a science class, and you drop it down to 4.5 pounds of pressure instead of 14.5 pounds. It's boiling at room temperature.
Right.
By the time you get down, you only have 1 pound of pressure left. It's just gone.
I can't explain that because, I mean, you can't say that's shadow because
We're in a different vacuum here. We're in a whole different kind of power of vacuum here.
Yeah.
Also, the claim was, and I can see it on your text there, that it was always an aluminium-made flag, which I found a bit of a strange one.
That was a video that a famous PhD said it was made out of aluminum.
Right.
Or tin.
It's not really.
And I won't mention his name.
It sounds like he's got the preconceived hypothesis disorder.
Scott, you brought up...
PhD, people having dreams.
I don't know if you guys talked about this in the first half when I wasn't here, but you mentioned the missing handle. Can we have a look at that picture back again, where the astronaut's coming down the ladder and there's no handle out the door? On the door, yeah.
Oh, on the door?
On the door.
The lunar module, I believe, where Buzz Aldrin's coming back down.
Yeah,
It
so
certainly looks like it's gaffer tape or something on the inside of that.
Oh, they
frame,
just
doesn't it?
tape all over the place. Buzz mentions the fact that, there's no handle on the outside.
Yeah.
so
Of
presumably
this vehicle.
it's up to the person on the inside to open that. Is that what we're saying?
Right,
Yeah.
when they initially got in it, they came down through the upper hatch,
Right.
right? And I don't know how they practiced with this thing in different things if there was no handle there. They must have known it. I think it was very quickly put together piece of equipment that they didn't have any knowledge of.
It just looks like a Blue Peter job.
I think Blue Peter did a better job of it.
Yeah, it's very early days of Doctor Who sort of set building, isn't it, really?
That's a nice one, yeah. No, in fact, that point you made about, well, couldn't the guy inside open it? There was nobody inside to open it, because they were both on the surface. There were only ever 2 astronauts in the lunar lander at any one time.
It's because the other one is orbiting.
And and also because the only way they could get the door open to get out was to depressurize the craft, i.e. let all the air out. If there had been any leak at all of any air inside the craft when they were outside on the surface, they wouldn't have been able to open the door at all, because the pressure of the air would have been far too great. So they were running an incredible risk of having the door partially closed. Why bother? They were going to get back in anyway. The craft was depressurized. They didn't need to do that.
There's some numbers on the vacuum of space. Okay, and the best we can test here on Earth with the newest machine is a Torr value of 10 to the minus 6. Okay, and they've never put any humans in that to test it. They don't put humans in there to test that.
It's far too dangerous.
The most they've tested the suits and the original CSM, not the LEM, just the CSM, was down to a 10 to the minus 3, just a low rough vacuum down.
There are people on, for instance, orbital missions like the International Space Station that do actually put on spacesuits and go outside. Other spacesuits that these people use are different design, because I know they do date back just as far, because there were people doing orbital EVAs, like the Russians did a couple before Apollo. Is there a significant difference in design between the Apollo spacesuits and those spacesuits?
Yeah, well, you have to realize all the testing. You're only getting between 80 and 100 miles off the surface of the Earth with that kind of a vacuum. Anything above that, as soon as you leave the Earth's atmosphere, the vacuum goes up dramatically.
So I know that there is a certain amount of residual atmosphere at low Earth orbit, because they have to actually accelerate the space station every so often. They have to actually put some boosters on there, and they have to do a burn every so often.
Solid line. It's not just a solid line where the atmosphere disappears.
It's because of atmospheric drag. So when you get beyond that, obviously the Apollo missions were so much higher than low Earth orbit. As you said, the difference between the vacuum and the atmosphere within the craft would be significant enough to mean you need major design differences.
Maybe I can pull up.
You have a chart which says interstellar space, 10 to the minus 17 pascals.
There's a picture of the Glenn Research Center vacuum chamber. It'll pull a Torr value of 10 to the minus 6. The walls are reinforced concrete. They're 8 feet thick. Another 2 feet of steel. The concrete has to be lined when they're pulling a vacuum down so it doesn't pull the air right through the concrete at the thing. So you have to imagine that if that's only the Earth's atmosphere outside of it, and whatever you put inside the structure of the craft you put inside the test, if you have one Earth's atmosphere inside, has to be as strong as this building.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, it was that building. I don't know if you remember when Brian Cox, in one of his humorous attempts to demonstrate the truth of space, took a bowling ball and a feather into that building, that very building, and dropped them down from the ceiling, and they showed that they both landed on the ground at the same time, which meant that there was no air resistance.
Mm.
Now, if you believe the spacesuits are as strong as that building, then you can go to the moon.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to put Professor Colin Cox
by
into
the way,
one of
this
them
building,
and send
this
him
building is about, give you at about 125 miles off the surface of the Earth.
there. Right.
The International Space Station has a torr value of 10 to the minus 7, which is 10 times more than this.
There's 10 times less. That's, yeah, I mean, a lot of people, you often see diagrams of the Earth-Moon system, and they're not built to scale. I mean, I've seen one because I've seen an actual true scale difference between the Earth and the Moon in the Oxford Science Museum. It's the equivalent of having a basketball and then taking like a cricket ball and walking about 20 feet away. And that's the scale we're talking about here. Whereas the International Space Station is just like a little insect crawling on the surface of the basketball. That's the difference. And it's a completely different environment. We're talking about many, many, many times further away than the orbital missions.
Scott, I'm noticing there's a few little images of some of the artifacts on the surface, footprints and odd rocks and things. Do you want to go into those a little bit?
Yes, I can. What I was going to do is pull up my presentation and
the presentation really sort of says it all. Take us through that if you like, because that really kind of goes from A to B of the whole thing you've been finding, really, because that sort of says it all.
Okay, you can see that just fine?
Yeah.
This is the Apollo 17 rovers, and there are 3 distinctive rovers being demonstrated in the photographs, and of course they ever only took one along. Okay? The one here on the left is the Apollo 15 rover, and it's being used in 15, 16, and 17. And as we go through, I will show you how to identify this particular machine. This is a brand new machine, doesn't have anything on the back. Fenders are perfect, everything else on it. This one, the fenders are missing on the back. And if you look at the frame rail under here, the length of the frame rail, and you see it sticks way out past with much shorter arms on it. Where that piece comes up is much shorter. This one's still underneath.
So we're being told this is the same vehicle. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they only had one.
They only had
Apollo
one.
17 had one rover.
But so this is all from the same mission?
This is all pictures from Apollo 17. Okay? This one on the left is Apollo 16, and you can see the rear fender is missing on it, and this is how they repaired it in Apollo 17. It's the same rover. But it's the same rover being used in 15, 16, and 17, this particular one. In Apollo 16, this rover was damaged when the entire machine was dropped in Apollo 15. The entire land when they were doing the simulated landing, and the rover literally smashed, like it came right off the machine itself and was damaged. When they were trying to fix it up continuously, here's the steering arm is gone right on the ground. It's laying down here on the ground.
So you're saying they were using the same rover for each mission, or trying to? Was that
all of the equipment? It's the same LEM. It's the same experimental equipment. It's the same rovers for all 6 missions.
And so were they? Because I don't know that much about the different missions. Like, were they landing at the same?
Shot on the same location.
Right. So basically, what was happening is allegedly the moon landings were happening at the same location and using the same kit that's already there. Is that right?
That's right.
It was a continuity error. It's something you get in fictional cinema all the time. Now, there's guys with thick glasses and anoraks who sit around in front of their TV hours on end, spotting these things and putting them up online, thinking they're really, really clever. And they say, look at this. Darth Vader was doing this in one scene, and the next scene he was doing another. And there's a whole industry of this, of people who don't have girlfriends and don't have jobs and things. Now, the funny thing is, if only these guys would put all that obsessive interest into doing the same thing with the Apollo missions. Yeah. Because you see these same continuity errors. What you just said, Andrew, is actually absolutely correct. You just said, well, did they shoot these 3 missions together when they were pre-shooting the fictionalized version? And the answer is yes. Actually, if it was real, you wouldn't get that.
On the right-hand side here, they are traveling from one station to another. And they're actually driving over top of tracks. That's what it shows in the video. They're driving over tracks to a new location that they've never been to before. The actual steering is broken, and the only way to drive this machine is backwards because they would splay out with this broken. So they actually reversed the video when they shot it. And you can see by the chevron pattern on the tire matches the direction they're going. If they were driving back over their own tracks, the chevron pattern would be in a different direction. And they actually shot photographs of almost 70 pictures of that or more, shooting this at the same time through. And you can match them up. This is Apollo 15. This is the rover with no tracks. Okay. It is here again in 16, and it is here again in 17.
Okay, Scott, just hold you there. We did bring this up with Marcus and Peter Bassett. Peter Bassett said, well, the reason there's no tracks is because they had to assemble the Lunar Rover. So they brought all the parts together, which is why you see the footprints. And there's no tracks because they had to assemble it all together.
And carry it out of
That's
away
inconsistent with the video of it being downloaded then. Because this is almost 100 feet away from the rover, or from the LEM at this point. Do you think they carried it around and carried all the pieces out to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one of the things I raised with Peter. Why was it assembled so far away? I don't think he had an answer for it. Could be wrong.
The data and the log files show that it was driven around the LEM to the other mesa where the equipment was, and everything was loaded on from that mesa.
Right.
Okay, what you're looking at here, each one of these, the rear left wheel has an oil leak. And again, no liquids in space. Okay? Doesn't matter what the liquid is, there are no liquids in space. And the oil is making the dirt stick to the rim. You can see the front rim doesn't have it, but the rear does.
I mean, if there's no liquids in space, presumably the lubrication oil on the axle would not have been in a sealed chamber, any more than so. You would have the lubrication oil itself wouldn't actually work. It would also not work in a vacuum.
Well, apparently they removed the oil lubrication from the camera, so the cameras wouldn't work either.
That's interesting, isn't it? And I should actually point out a bit of breaking news because you mentioned the oil. Issue. Now, the video I told you about earlier, whose title I couldn't remember, I actually went and looked it up just a moment ago while you two were talking about this. It talks about, among other things, that the grit on the floor of the studio was mixed with oil to get a more realistic texture, which is why it stuck to the spacesuit. It wasn't static cling, it was actually stuck to the space. I mean, you could tumble dry your nylons all day and you wouldn't get static cling like that, would you? That video's now been removed from YouTube.
Yes, no doubt.
Yeah, it's another example of shadow banning or things being got rid of that are inconvenient.
Right, but the same oil on the rear left tire is showing up in 16, and here again in 17. And you can see the oil is leaking so bad in 17, it's going right up the frame rail there. And the associated photographs of this, it's all over the back of the astronaut suit as well.
And we're definitely sure this is not just a shadow anomaly.
Right. This is Apollo 16, and this is the jump photo shoot on it, and they pulled this absolutely brand new rover out. I've never seen another photograph of it anywhere. I have all the photographs, and it has a double rib on the front left fender.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's the only shot of this rover on it.
So they actually have a model there that doesn't actually appear in the rest of the
Any other
footage.
photo. This is Apollo 17, and this is just in front. That's the right rear fender on each. This one doesn't show the fender, but it's right in front of the fender on both. And this is the frame of each of the 3 separate rovers that are being used in Apollo 17. And you can see quite a huge difference in the way these things were actually constructed. Right? No possible way you could have, just from different lighting or anything else, they couldn't change all of this on there.
Scott, have you put this to NASA? And if so, what's their answer?
There's no response from NASA.
There's a surprise.
Okay. However, down here, you can see that there's 3 completely different sets of tire tracks.
Yeah.
3 separate rovers showing, and 3 separate tires showing.
My goodness, yeah, you have very different. You have like they always say, you mustn't mix the tracks on if you're doing if you're on the roads, but obviously they've done it on the moon. Interesting. I want to make a point about NASA, or Andrew said. NASA apparently have really not made a serious effort to actually respond to these allegations. They did get a guy to actually talk about. His name was Dr. Walsh, and he talked about for a while after the Fox documentary came out, and he was on David Percy Mary Bennett's video too. There was a guy called James Oberg, who's well known as a UFO debunker. He actually was commissioned by NASA to write a book about this, to refute everything that Scott and Marcus have been talking about. But apparently that project was cancelled. Oberg then said he was going to carry on writing the book and find another publisher, but the book has not yet appeared.
Well, he's obviously having trouble finding a publisher 15 years down the line.
He didn't even bring it out on like Lulu or anything. I mean, it's like he's just given up on it. Or maybe someone told him to give up on it.
Yes, because it was going to attract more attention to NASA than they wanted to deal with. Because after the Fox TV program came out in 2001, that generated a vast amount of criticism of NASA. And then Fox went ahead and repeated it, so it generated even more criticism. So NASA wanted to deflect from this. Hence, James Oberg was said, get lost, guys. We're not interested in a book about it as well. Had enough trouble with the film.
Scott, just stop there with your scrolling. Up a little bit. And those little rock things, down a bit. Stop. Those rock things, screen 121, yeah. Just explain what's going on with those.
You can see the what looks to be a astronaut standing beside the rock there.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
This is
Looks
just
like a Monopoly house.
This is just a bit of artistic work on how good these guys that were building the sets are. That's the actual rock there from a different angle.
Yeah.
I pulled that one out just for fun, just to show how good these guys were looking. I'm just kind of looking for a...
It's kind of unusual to find a rock that big on the moon, because I always thought the moon was kind of like basically desert type area, obviously with no air, but with small rocks, and then we're seeing like huge rocks like that.
Okay, and that's the arm of the rover is finally broken off. The steering linkage broke off to it, and they dropped a golf ball down beside of it. You can definitely see the backdrop here is just one beautiful line on this particular photograph. And this is because the ground is very wet. And of course, the footprints are darker underneath because the ground's even wetter underneath there. And you can see it around here how wet it is on the ground on here. And we're going to get into some more water.
It's almost as if maybe this was an outdoor set and it rained slightly.
Oh, absolutely.
Could it be argued that somebody like Brian Cox might say, oh well, obviously if you disturb the surface, it's going to be darker underneath because it's a different type of soil? Would that be the case?
Actually, any photograph you take a look at the moon on any impact crater, it's lighter underneath.
Oh, okay.
You can even see it with just walk out and look at the moon at night. You can see the radial striation lines are lighter in color, not darker.
Right.
In this particular, this is the cuff checklist, and you can see it's just a storyboard on how they put the each scene together. So up in here, the LMP shows exactly where he's going to be standing, where he's already walked. Like this is done months before they went to the moon. Where the disturbed area is, where the rock was moved out of where the hole was and where they put the rock. And then the commander, the 4 different positions he's going to be standing in, the number of photographs he's going to take, and the camera settings for each photograph. Over here, this is how to shoot the scene to film this rock, and it even describes the mineral contents inside the rock once it's split open. How could they possibly know that months before the launch? How could they identify? If you look at the LRO pictures, the imaginary LOR pictures, I mean, the lander's 32 feet across and it takes up 2 pixels, right? How could they find out where this rock was? It's only 18 inches across.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely new environment. You'd think they'd have to they're just told to make it up as they go along.
It even has the timeline on here, exactly what time, right to the second, they were going to arrive at.
Where did they fit golf into all of this?
Golf?
When they were playing golf on the moon?
Every day at lunch.
They had a bar there as well.
Okay. This is the Apollo 16. This is the Grand Prix. And which you see the Grand Prix video. If you Google that, you can see them do the video. And they're just talking about, oh, well, turn it to the right, turn it to the left, or give it a hard left, or whatever. And he's going, oh, I don't know if I can do that. Here, it's all laid out for them. The 4 craters, how they drive through them, the 2 camera positions where they're going to be sitting. And there's supposed to be one astronaut operating these 2 cameras, plus taking photographs at the same time.
Can I bring up some obvious objections that might be on people's lips right now? And one of those is that it wasn't just NASA who were monitoring this particular mission. Apparently, several radio telescopes were actually tracking the craft on the way to the moon. So, for example, Jodrell Bank telescope claims to have followed the command module all the way to the moon and the lunar module all the way to the lunar surface.
Radio communication?
By apparently intercepting the radio transmission aircraft.
I've never seen a radio that can GPS locate where the signal's coming from.
This is just a claim they made. There was a TV program trying to prove that moon landings were real. One of the few refutations that you guys have ever actually experienced. And also,
well, when I'm driving in my car, listening to the radio, okay, there's no possible way I can locate where that signal's coming from.
Yeah. Oh, and Ben, one point on that Jodrell Bank tracking. Jodrell Bank were actually using their big 300-foot diameter dish, the one we see in all the pictures. They were using that dish to track the Russian craft, which was also on its way to the moon, the same time as Apollo 11. NASA had an office at Jodrell Bank, and they were using their 50-foot diameter dish to track Apollo. And they then claimed to have been able to identify the path that the Apollo 11 lander took as it approached the lunar surface. And they're very proud of their little graph, which they've drawn to show when Neil Armstrong took over manual control of the craft and how they landed it on the moon, which is absolute nonsense, because no radar can operate at 240,000 miles to pick up an object 20 foot across and identify its trajectory at that distance. It's fiction. The whole thing is complete fiction, but it's part of the whole parable of creating this image of landing on the moon. Well, of course, Jodrell Bank tracked it, and Jodrell Bank are a reputable place, therefore it must be true. No, it's not. NASA were telling them what to do. Jodrell Bank were far more concerned with tracking the Russian craft, which is what they were employed to do by the Russians with the full knowledge of the British and American governments. There was no problem about that. And then we get on this ridiculous story of the ham radio operators who were listening in to the Apollo command module.
That's another one I heard.
How are they listening when the command module and the lunar module, well, the command module specifically, were transmitting back to Earth, we're told, using the gigahertz frequency?
And with only, was it 4.5 kilowatts?
Yes, and ham radio operators can only operate on long waves. They can't pick up gigahertz. They don't have the equipment to do it. Again, another fantasy trotted out by people trying to support this ridiculous deception.
I'm glad you brought up the Russians, because this is another issue. And indeed, His Royal Cocksness actually mentioned this in the same documentary. Yeah, he's so clever. Don't question him. But of course, this was the Cold War. This was the heart of the Cold War. The USA, Soviet Union, locked in this bitter space race. Now, of course, NASA were controlling all the information, as you explained, but there was one other country in those days that had the capability of actually checking what NASA had done on the moon and reporting back immediately if there was any fraud. I mean, today there's 6 or 7 countries, but in those days there was one other. And that, of course, was the Soviet Union. Now, this is a big objection. They're locked in this life or death space race for the control of the world. What happened in the space race happened in the Cold War. It affected everything else. So wouldn't they be the first people to say, oh, look, come on, they're cheating. They're cheating. This isn't fair. Especially when you consider that the KGB had penetrated the Western establishment to such a great degree. We still don't know completely exactly how successful they've been. Some of the spies are probably still alive and hoping they don't get caught. So why on earth didn't the Russians say anything? Because they must have known. They must have done. They must at least suspected, and they'd be able to check it out.
But who in Russia would have blown the whistle? Who would have said it?
Any of them. They just said, my goodness, the Americans are cheating. This isn't a fair race. They just faked something.
Look, there was nobody in Russia who knew the Americans were cheating, any more than there was anybody in the West knew the Americans were cheating. It's only the research that's been done over the last 50 years that we've uncovered the whole story. Now, also, you now have to look at the whole political situation. In the late 1960s, at the same time Apollo was allegedly on its way to the moon, in the late 1960s, the Soviet Union, as it was then, were desperately trying to sign contracts for the sale of their natural gas, one of the very few resources they have in abundance, into West Germany, Austria and Italy. The contract was signed by their foreign minister, Andrei Gromyko, in August 1968 for the supply of natural gas.
Exton's built a pipeline, that's true.
Now, that is still going on. Russian natural gas is sold into Western Europe, throughout Western Europe, in vast quantities. Nord Stream 2 is the Baltic pipeline, goes under the Baltic Sea, from near St. Petersburg down to the north coast of Germany to supply the natural gas. So you've got this whole geopolitical situation where Russia or Soviet Union are desperately trying to exist as a country. If they even knew, which is highly unlikely that they would know, that there was any strange event going on the lunar surface, some Americans capering around taking photographs, they're not interested in upsetting them because they've got far more important things to worry about, like the survival of their country.
It's also interesting to know that it actually benefits both sides in the Cold War, in the space race, for it to be a much closer race, because it's close races that are always the most interesting. And for the first decade of the space race, I think it's fair to say that the Soviets had a distinctive and quite significant lead. If it went on to become too decisive, it could essentially be called off, and it could just be agreed that the Russians won, and let's forget about it. Let's just forget about spending all these billions of dollars on these projects and things like that. So it's actually it may have been in the interest of letting the Americans catch up a bit, because the Russians got Sputnik up, they got Yuri Gagarin up. What's the next big step after you've got a rocket up and you've got the first astronaut? What's the next step? I mean, obviously Mars is too far away. There's nothing really in between. It has to be the moon. It has to be a manned lunar mission. So it was, in a sense, it gave the Americans a chance to get back in the game. Well, once the game was back on, both sides could then justify perhaps bigger expenditures, expansion of the projects and things like that. So that's another reason. And also, another important point, which what was it? I wasn't going to say. So it'll come back to me in a minute.
Well, actually, one point on that about the whole cooperation business. One of the last things that President Kennedy did on November the 12th, 1963, 10 days before he was assassinated, was to sign an executive order ordering NASA to cooperate with the Soviet Union on space travel. Because as he so accurately decided, why are we spending the money and they're spending the money? Why don't we just do it together? That became the Apollo-Soyuz cooperation. So the Soviet Union and America were cooperating right from the beginning. There was no race. There was nothing to do with it. That's a media invention.
And also, also another reason that makes me think about this is now the two nearest planets to the Earth are Venus and Mars. There's Mercury as well, of course, of the inner planets, which comes up again later. But both the Russians and the Americans sent probes to both Venus and Mars. Now, all the most successful Martian probes were American. All the most successful Venusian probes were Russian. Was this a case of them, perhaps, they come to some deal? They say, Russians, you have Venus, we'll have Mars. Is that possible? I mean, obviously there were attempts made by both nations, but the serious work, the serious successes were Venus is Russia, Mars is America.
Or one could say that because it was very well known within certain circles, within fairly high up in the American political and military establishments, that E.T. was out there. Do we know if he's friendly or not? Russia said, well, we'll go and have a look at Venus, you're going to have a look at Mars, and we'll report back.
And that's
it's more likely to be the case.
The UFO issue and everything. I want to come to that in a minute, but I want to also ask, bring up another point which I remembered now, is that there are certain question marks over some of the achievements of the Russians too. David Percy and Mary Bennett have analysed the mission of Yuri Gagarin and the famous televised images that came from that. And there are some anomalies with that which suggest that perhaps that wasn't a genuine manned mission either.
Well, there are certainly many doubts about a lot of the Soviet reported successes, because don't forget, they never reported their failures. They only told us when they succeeded, and they told us afterwards. My contention is that Gagarin was the poster boy. He was the guy that they could manipulate, because the real first man to orbit the Earth was more than likely to have been Vladimir Ilyushin, who flew about a week before Gagarin's flight.
Was he the guy who died? He crashed in did he crash in China or something and he was dead? Yeah.
No, he crashed in China because the retro rockets didn't fire correctly. He was very badly injured, and he recuperated in China, and 6 months after he landed, he was returned to Russia. And he resumed his career later on. He was flew with the Soviet Air Force. He was one of their senior test pilots before his accident. And there are photographs of him which exist. He's never, in so many words, said that he was a cosmonaut. But the evidence surrounding his flight and the evidence which indicates that the Chinese knew what was going on but couldn't talk about it, to the extent that whenever Gagarin went round on his world tour, no Chinese diplomats were present at any of the receptions to welcome him in various countries, indicating Chinese knew that Gagarin wasn't the real deal.
Well, that is interesting, yeah. So there's all kinds of, it's all much more complicated. I'm glad you brought up the UFO issue. Now, Neil,
I was going to say there's... Carry on, Ben, go on.
I was going to say, you and I both know Andrew Johnson.
Yeah.
He's a regular at the Highwork and Paranormal group, and he's been on your show, just like I have and Marcus has. Now, he's said a lot about the secret space program and about the ET issue, because, of course, while the Cold War was in progress, it's almost actually completely concurrent with the Cold War, though it goes on today. The fact is that there is an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race has been known by those in authorities, and they've gone to enormous efforts by way of a global policy that all nation states appear to have been obeying up till now, including the UK, to keep this fact from the public. And of course, once we get into space, that's when it can become a bit complicated. Indeed, there's some interesting footage from the International Space Station which indicates some of the astronauts have not been briefed into this, and they have reacted when strange craft appear. But how do you think that the presence of the ETs and indeed the secret space program influences this whole issue?
Tricky one. Well, I mean, there's this whole thing about supposedly Neil Armstrong saw a UFO on the moon. It's reported in various UFO books, and so that kind of makes you think, the moon landings must have happened then, because they're talking about something that's usually hushed up. Neil Armstrong saw 3 large saucers on the edge of a crater. But my feeling on that particular issue is that that's probably a bit of CIA disinformation to put out there to give the impressions that, yes, it must be a real moon landing because they saw UFOs and God knows what else on the moon. So that's what I think. We were talking roughly about these charts, Scott, and I remember this from seeing this before, this Jones fellow that appears in your chart as the kind of director, if you like, of the particular proceedings. Can you get back to that a little bit?
Yes, well, he's the inspector for the photography on there, and they penciled him in on the cuff checklist to show exactly where he's standing, so that way he wouldn't be in the shot. See? And so it's showing it there, and it's showing these different craters here on it, and then when you come to here, you can see that it's Inspector Jones, host is the photographer. Okay, and here's the date that it was shot at. Of course, they didn't leave until December. The launch date was December the 7th, and this was shot on the 28th of November, 1972.
That's more than a week earlier.
Yes. And there are some people on the internet that claim that Jones was actually a crater. And they actually produced a map and put it up, and it's been taken back down again. So I have here the latest LRO image, and there's Henry and Shakespeare crater. Jones is listed at station 9 here, and you can see that there's no Jones crater. They put one in about this big around. Now, the other thing is if you're looking at any of the photographs, you'll see the depth of these craters. The rover never drove or traversed through any crater of any size at all, like little wee potholes, but not part of the crater. Couldn't possibly do it.
I think we've lost audio, Scott.
Testing. Hello?
I was going to say, can you put your mic on mute then, whilst we're listening? Just the crackling still comes through a little bit. Until it's ready to chat, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Sorry, carry on there, Scott.
Yes. So this is the actual date. These color charts are test charts are on the front of every video. They're all available on YouTube for you to see. And for even in like when you're pulling up a video, they're at the start of each sequence of each video. The date, time, the inspector, photographer, but very important, the date are all on them, and they're all done a few weeks before, a week or so before the actual launch on them. And there's no way, and Marcus will tell you that, there's no way you could color calibrate a camera and then expect it to be properly calibrated when you're outside the Earth's atmosphere. You get full UV lighting, everything else, everything would be completely different. This is
correct.
This, well, if you want to expand on that, Marcus, go ahead.
No, it's just to say you're quite right that the UV light would affect the colours on that colour chart if it was on the lunar surface, and the film would not record the colours correctly. There were colour charts or colour strips on some of those little triangular, I call them genomes, I don't think that's the correct word for it, little triangular things they put there to show what was up and what was down. And on one of the legs they had a chart, which was supposedly a colour chart, so they could calibrate the film. Quite how they were going to do that with the development, because you can't see what the colour is until you develop the film.
Oh, they were high technology. They were developing it on the spot out there.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, part of the lunar lander was a photographic laboratory where they could develop their film and they could look at it. Yeah, and pigs might fly as well. But that picture you've got there about the lander, I think, brings up a very interesting point.
On the left-hand side here is the Apollo 15 diagram of the descent stage of the LEM. And in quadrant 1 is the helium tank is located right there on the spot. On the right-hand side is Apollo 15. Yeah, this is 15, I think. Could be 15, 16, 17, doesn't matter. It has a rover. And you can see the rover's right there in quadrant 1. And to spot that, it's counterclockwise. The quadrants are counterclockwise from the ladder around. So they simply remove the helium tank, and what the helium tank does is to pressurize the 4 fuel tanks to push the fuel through the engine. Okay? Here, they don't have the tank. It's simply removed, so there's no way to pressurize the fuel, and the fuel sits in each of the 4 squares, and the engine sits in the center. And if you can't pressurize the fuel to push the through to the engine won't run. So it doesn't matter whether the helium tank is there or not. It didn't really matter because that thing wasn't running. It didn't leave a blast crater. Okay, and there's no possible way that was going to happen. And that's how they added the rover to the machine. Okay, there's extra batteries have to be added for it and everything else. The extra battery packs for their backpack, the Bliss, were also located right down on the side of that helium tank, and they're completely removed as well, just to put the rover in place. Okay, it's just a stage model that they've done. The thing certainly never flew.
Wow.
And one piece on that, if you could just go back to that previous picture, because it shows the top of the lunar lander, basically the launch pad for the upper stage, the ascent stage,
yeah.
where the astronauts were. Now, when they took off from the lunar surface, allegedly, they fired their rocket, because there were two rocket engines, one in the lower section, as Scott has indicated, in the center of that right-hand diagram, was the descent stage rocket, 10,000-pound thrust. The ascent stage rocket, using the same fuel, hypergolic fuel, was in the center of the ascent stage. But when you fire a rocket, it tends to produce quite a lot of exhaust and heat and noise and all the things that rockets do. So where did the exhaust go as the ascent stage was building up its power to take off? Because there is no exhaust hole. There's nowhere for the exhaust to go.
No, it's going to blow right down on here and right down on top of those fuel tanks.
Yeah, and more than likely ignite them, as well as fry the astronauts.
Because
And
that's
damage.
when you. I was going to say, when you see the launch of the Saturn V, and this also goes to the shuttle, they fire those F1 engines and the shuttle engines for at least 5 or 6 seconds. And like in the case of the shuttle, there was 2 clamps that held down to the wings of the whole thing to hold it there whilst the pressure built up of those rockets firing. Once everything was at maximum thrust, then they just let it go. It's rather like you holding a balloon filled with air, and once it's filled with air, then you let go, and then the balloon will fire off. So it has to be held in place for it to build up the pressure. There was no sort of like Marcus says, field of flame or something coming out from those rockets at all. Like 5 or 6 seconds maybe before the actual launch of the ascent module. It was like as if it was just on a spring or something.
And also, what you've just described, what's been described, could do considerable damage to the ascent stage as well, because it's rather when you're like firing a gun. That's a solid object. Now, if you do that, it's quite likely it'll backfire.
Yeah, it's
And,
like close to you. Yeah.
You can imagine a shockwave.
Would you like to see a video of a takeoff? I got one handy.
Sure.
Yeah, let's go for it. Let's go for it.
We'll start it right here.
You can see that when these explosive bolts, were triggered to launch this thing, and then it's supposed to, fly off in space, that the explosion blew these panels off, or partially blew them off, and you can see that the side of the spacecraft there just kind of lit. So it looks like, to me, it looked like fabric just kind of rippling in the wind, and what that would mean, and then you go back into the transcript, listen to audio, and one of the massive astronauts mentioned the anomalies.
It's interesting. All those explosive debris, bolts, and things like that never destroyed the camera that was filming it.
Nor the actual pressure hull of the spacecraft.
Yeah.
That'd have been a disaster. It's another case in which you get a leak in the spacecraft, which would release the atmosphere, and the astronauts would suffocate in the vacuum.
Yeah.
So all these things that could have gone wrong. At the same time, we have this. This brings us back to the secret space program. I mean, wouldn't it be easier just to let the secret space program do whatever is necessary in space? And NASA, why would NASA take the risk where the whole world is watching?
Yeah.
Because NASA had a plan B. Plan B was the backup.
Maybe NASA weren't aware of the secret space program. They were just going on their own merry way, and the secret space program was so compartmentalised that no one knew anything about it anyway. Oh, now this is an interesting thing, isn't it, Scott? This is the command module, and you've noticed some interesting reflections on the actual capsule.
Well, yes, you're looking at a couple of doors right there. You can see the window and the doors. Those are colonial-style doors. You can see the door handle there. And then there's 3 guys standing back here in the background.
So
what
we should
actually have to realize is that, well, first of all, the CSM is below the LEM. And if you watch the actual video, it goes right down to a point where you can't even see it. The CSM did not descend to the lunar surface. Okay? There's nothing in their data, nothing in their tracking, anything that shows that the LEM was ever above the CSM in orbit around the moon. And here it is below. And the other thing is, the moon's lit up behind it. The only thing you should be able to see in that reflection is the blackness of space.
Because essentially that section there is like a polished mirror, isn't it? It's so reflective.
Right. It's just hung up in a hanger, and it's reflecting the doors and everything around the walls.
And I bet if you zoomed in on that man, he'd resemble Douglas Trumbull.
Brian Cox.
Yeah, I do.
This one is quite interesting because, of course, the watch says 11:15. Now, Buzz Aldrin descended officially to the lunar surface at 3:16:15 UTC time. This photograph was taken 59 minutes and 20 seconds after he descended onto the lunar surface. So UTC time, it should say 4:15. Okay, but what it's saying is 11:15. Even if you were in Florida time, it would be wrong. It might be correct. Well, who knows when they shot it, because it's a simulation, right? Whatever the time they were supposed to be shooting at. He's shooting at whatever the local time is, and that could be Houston or Arizona.
I wonder what the local time is on the moon. How many hours ahead is it?
And what's the make of the watch? I mean, is it a particular brand?
Oh yes, it's Omega is the brand of watch.
Omega, yeah.
No,
You can still buy that watch today for about $25,000.
Wow.
But Dave, I've not seen them advertise the fact that their watch went to the moon. I mean, you think that their brand?
Yes, you just go on the Omega website.
Oh, they do.
Buy that watch today.
Again,
The Lunar watch is actually one of their cheaper models. They have much more expensive models than $25,000 ones.
wouldn't that be lubricated slightly with some minor mechanical oils or something? Or a watch?
I have no idea what they would put in a watch.
And the temperature variation, again, you have like
Yeah.
the very hot conditions in the sunlight and extremely cold conditions in the shadow. Could a watch like that actually function in that kind of environment?
Yeah.
Because it's very delicate clockwork, it's like little springs and cogs and gears and things.
That's right, yeah.
Any metallic expansion, you know what it's like.
The battery would keep it running?
I went to Canada in 97, I think it was, and I took my SLR camera, and it was just failing, and that was kind of minus 10 degrees, I think. And
yeah, they don't like the batteries on those sorts of things.
Yeah, it was just failing, like the shutter mechanism wasn't working properly, went back into the warmth, and it started working again. So we're meant to believe that a watch like this, an intricate watch, is supposed to operate in huge temperature differences.
Well, you know what happens to a pen-light battery when the liquid leaks out of it? It quits working, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
What's going to happen to a battery in a vacuum?
Yes.
How fast is that going to explode and everything going to leak out of it? Never mind the temperature.
Another point which is mentioned by Megan Hewell, who is an astrophysicist, and she's a defender of the NASA and their official story of the Apollo missions, is that metallic objects like that in a lunar environment could actually produce radiation when they come into contact with, say, high frequency, for instance, X-rays and things like that. So it could actually add to the radiation problem. So all the metallic surfaces on the entire mission could, in a sense, make it even more dangerous.
Oh, sure, it could be gamma rays, microwaves, anything coming in.
Scott,
You want to take this one, Marcus?
What's that? Say again?
Would you like to take this picture?
Yep. What, the Aldrin, it's the Aldrin coming down the ladder picture, isn't it?
Yeah, and where the TV camera is supposed to be and why it isn't there.
Well, it was supposed to be on the left-hand side. It was lowered down on a shelf.
Yeah, it's supposed to be right in there.
That's right, yep. Yep.
Okay? And where that leg's shot is right out here.
Yep. And the TV image does not match the photograph. Because he certainly isn't shown kicking his leg out. So as he's coming down the ladder, he's coming down relatively gently. And that bright piece of light, the triangular piece of light, that is Armstrong, who is standing in the sunlight. And that is the idea behind the NVIDIA film, that they discovered that Armstrong would reflect enough light into the scene. But you can see how dark it is. You can hardly tell Aldrin. You can just see a very ghostly-like shape.
Well, wouldn't the TV camera be able to pick up as much light as the Hasselblad?
Well, you'd think so, but then the TV camera probably had an automatic aperture on it. And because the brightest section was the surface, it was photographing that. The aperture would be open to the point where the surface would not be overexposed. But that meant that Aldrin was seriously underexposed, which rather backs up the idea that there isn't enough reflected light coming out from anywhere, let alone the lunar surface, to illuminate Aldrin to the degree that we see in the photograph on the left, where he's basically lit up like a Christmas tree.
Well, it's just multiple scene takes. You changed the lighting up.
Yep.
Changed everything else up. The TV camera has now disappeared from there, and when the TV camera was live, Neil Armstrong would have to be right there to take that photograph at the same time as he's coming down the ladder. Because you can see right back to the rear leg on here.
Yes,
so he
you
has
can.
to be right up to there. And here he is over here.
Yeah.
And if you watch the video of Neil, just before he steps into the light, he says, "It's so dark I can't see my feet."
That's right, yeah. So where's all this reflected light we keep hearing about from Apollo apologists? There's some serious anomalies about this whole program. And it's only because it's been examined in such detail with the equipment we have in the 21st century that it's been uncovered. Which is great, because at least we now get some honesty out of NASA. But of course NASA can't admit that they fooled us all. Because they'll probably get shut down.
Well, that's putting it mildly. Sorry, Neil, I was going to say...
Here's another image to go with that. That's the upper window.
Oh, that's right, yeah, the famous image of the flag reflected in...
This window up here.
That's right, yes, that window.
And the image is there, and it's already deployed before Buzz comes down.
Yeah, because they officially only put the flag up once they were both on the lunar surface.
Well,
So
the
what's
video
that?
certainly to show that.
Yeah, but you
Video
see,
shows clearly.
that image is supposed to show something inside the lunar module. That's what the apologists will tell you. That's what I've been told. That isn't a flag. That is something inside the lunar module. Well, if it is, it's giving a remarkable impression of the American flag.
Yeah. Wasn't that line, what we see as the flag pole, wasn't that like in videos I've seen like a scale of maybe degrees or something on the window where they're measuring the angle of the moon or something as they're flying towards it or something like that? I could be wrong, but
That's right.
I see
Yes.
something similar. Yeah.
Yes, there is. There are supposed to be charts inside the window, and sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. But you think that if
I
that
can show you that. 30. Maybe it's down here.
some photographs do show it, I know.
Yeah.
It's in one of the videos. I should come back to here and just show you this. Why? Here's another one of their test streets in front of this.
Yeah, that's the one of Apollo 11.
Yeah.
Where it's showing as a date about 5 days before they took off.
Okay, I'm just going to speed this up a bit. See the double shadow there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this is supposed to be uncut.
Yeah, this is uncut. This is filmed from inside the capsule.
And there it broke. They just redid it. And there's the flag in the different position.
Yeah, that's
Go back and do that again. Let's have a look at that again.
If it's one piece of film, there would be no edit in it at all.
Just like, how did I jump to there again? 30. Up there. I have it on double speed right now. Quite clearly the double shadow.
Yeah, there is. Double shadow, and the flag is completely different position. That's probably one of the biggest giveaways of them all.
Can the actual moment of the cut be identified? When it clipped went from one image to the other? Because obviously this can't be a continuous shot.
Here's the...
Oh, that's the scale on the window.
On the window.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's what I was referring
definitely
to.
not doing the flag.
There's two scales on there, actually, isn't there? Not one.
That's right. Okay. So we saw those two things on there, right? And then, being we got the flag in the different position, I got that one.
Yeah.
This one here. That's the very last shot out the window before they took off. Okay.
Right.
Then it goes to the DAC image that we just watched live. The flag's in a completely different spot. Both astronauts are in the craft.
And after they placed it into position, neither of them touched the flag until they took off. So how come the flag is at about 90 degrees different position?
Yeah, well, they're back in the craft to shoot this again.
Yeah.
They don't get out again.
Blame it on Jones.
Wow.
Or the solar wind.
Could have been any of the guys down on the crew.
Yeah.
You know, you were talking about the... Sorry,
Here again's the double image showing up again in Apollo 14.
So there's essentially two light sources here then, causing a strong shadow and then a lighter shadow because there's a light coming from another side or something.
But you can see they're adjusting the lighting because it's on this side and then it changes to this side.
Yeah.
They're actually adjusting it. And these guys are just sitting inside fooling around with the cameras, taking shots.
Because they're bored.
Well, it's not lunchtime.
Yeah.
Not time for golf yet.
Oh yeah, this is interesting.
This is the part of the other video I watched that I showed you on the takeoff of Apollo 16.
Uh-huh.
They actually put the explosive pack up inside there.
Right.
Okay? You could see the deterioration of this piece of equipment from laying around. The paint's all peeling back on it. And these guys deliberately did that. What is behind those panels? I mean, they're not sealing anything. They're just there to cover it over. All their communications, so-called, all their actuators to run all the retro rockets, all their power, and all their computer stuff is supposed to be in there. Right behind the panels, and there's no protection from them. If they blew it like that, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Never mind the impact. You saw the amount of impact of that. It would rupture the craft in space, and it would just be a big explosion.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
This is one of the most staged scenes that they did, and it's showing that everybody was in on this fraud. Okay. They piled this dirt up. They set this tool down to make an arrow, and at the end of the arrow, and you can see the rubber tip and the black ring on the tip right in there on it, and the glove goes up to there and it's pinned in along there, and that's the pinky finger of a right-handed glove, and then all the fingers are sticking up here in it. And if you study that, this whole area in here, they're like stacked in like a half a dozen gloves in a stack, and all the fingers are sticking out all the way through that.
Just to elaborate a little bit for those that don't know, you're suggesting, Scott, that this was shot in Arizona at a what do you call it?
At the just north of Flagstaff, Cinder Lake. That's a military center, and NASA's there, and the landfill site is on the
landfill site. That's it.
Southeast corner of Cinder Lake. It's still in operation today, and people say, "Oh, they they don't understand what I mean by landfill. It's not a garbage dump. It's not a refuge dump like that. This is where they were just putting out old cars and heavy machinery and stuff like that, metal pieces and stuff like that. They just put them out. Planes, rockets.
So just to understand what's going on here, what's this with the rubber gloves tips sticking out? Are we saying they're buried? I don't get it.
Yeah, they set this up. They staged it.
So it's rubber gloves in a kind of Star Trek simulated rock, foam rock or something.
It's not a rock. It's just dirt.
Dirt. They've covered it over, and there's gloves sticking out of it. Yeah.
This is what this was a big point in the Dark Moon book by Mary Bennett and David Percy. There was the people involved in this. They actually deliberately put these things in, hoping that maybe years down the line, people like Marcus and Scott would actually spot them. They'd spot these errors and be able to do something to put the word out. So it's as you said. I think Scott, you said that they were, in a sense, that tool there that they've actually laid deliberately to point to this particular spot.
That's right.
It's
everything about this is intentional. You can look at all the photographs. You'll never see a pile of dirt like this.
Because that's how if I was on that film crew, I'd have wanted to do something like that. Because
let's put up there with a backhoe.
Hmm.
Here's the Apollo 15 lander. This arm sticking down is the lowering arms for the rover itself. You can see that it's crushed in. They actually dropped the machine while they were doing the simulation. And the close-up here shows the lowering arms that lower it down are broken right off. They're sheared right off there, and all of these are sheared off that lowered the rover down. And that's how the rover initially got damaged. That's why the front left fender is damaged on it when it's on the initial. You see it. That's how the steering got damaged. And the one battery bank was down. Two of the batteries were gone on it, so it couldn't possibly run the distance it said it did or the speed it was running at. But this is the shot of it. There's mold on the sewage bag. I mean, this just came out of the LEM, right? They just set it out.
Yeah.
It's got mold on it. I mean, all these things happen in a few minutes. Here's some more shots of the damage. Of course, it took 3 days before they even took any outside shots around the LEM itself. This leg is not positioned in the center anymore because the ball joints sheared right off of it. The two backpacks, the plisses, here's one here, there's one here. This guy's wearing one, and the guy behind the camera has to have one. So only two are issued. But you can see just the cooling coil right there went inside these two canisters, and they're just riveted together. If they were actually working in a vacuum, they'd have to be welded solidly to be able to do what they're going to do. These are just cooling when they're running around on Earth to keep them cool in the suits. Okay, both of them were damaged though, so I had to go get some other ones to put them on for the shot. Here's another shot. This is the leg that's broken, that was completely sheared off. And if you watch the video of them landing, you can see this leg kick out. These are the ball swivel joints here, because the legs swung in when they loaded it on the rocket and then swung back out again. And here they are, nicely replaced, and they just left the broken ones on the ground. Okay? These legs have a compression of 32 inches, and they have a honeycomb aluminum in them, 2 cartridges of honeycomb aluminum, and they squash down like a pop can. There's no rebound damping. They're not like a car shock or anything else. They crush down to take the impact of the landing, and they don't recoil back. So they travel 32 inches. This one is 32 inches. This one's over 4 feet. Okay, because I had to try and get it up. This is the new strut. This one has no compression at all. Because if it had any compression, the foil would wrinkle up. Just the weight of this machine, without any G-force landing, these things are supposed to come down 10 inches. Okay? Nothing at all is happening with them. Anyways.
It's very sad, isn't it? that for
Yes.
40, 50 years, this story's been fed to us that man landed on the moon.
I mean, we've even got the movie coming out, First Man, haven't we?
Oh yes. Yeah, that's due at the end of
and
this
everyone's
week.
going to be lauding about it. I mean, the BBC or Channel 4, all the mainstream media, they're going to be, oh, the First Man, isn't it a wonderful movie to, you know, celebrate the landings on the moon? And essentially, it's all bollocks.
I'm going to be reviewing that film because I suspect it'll have a lot of propaganda in. Probably some subtle hints that are trying to discredit what we've been talking about this evening. Because, as you say, will not speak openly about this because they know it's counterproductive from their point of view because it only draws more attention to something which is logically provable, and they don't like that. So I'm interested. I'm interested to see it. I will go and watch that film, and I'll review it.
Well, I should. Yeah, I'll be watching it as well. I think it's going to be interesting to see just how they manage to spin the story.
Yeah.
You know,
I wonder if they wet the flag. Here's a comparison of the Bliss. This is a museum. This is what's on display in the museum. Everything that's supposed to be in it. The batteries there, the oxygen tank, the 2 purge tanks at the top. Somewhere tucked in there is supposed to be the radio communication. See this cooling coil right here? That's it, right in there.
I see.
So this is what we're looking at is the inside of the backpack for each astronaut. Okay.
On the left, but this is what they had with them.
Yeah. So if they spent 2 hours on the moon, allegedly, did they go back and refuel their oxygen tanks or not?
no.
They have them recharging in some of their log files that they're putting water back in them.
And what about oxygen?
No, they just anything that's in the cuff checklists are to check the oxygen on and off, and that's about it.
But then we're back to the question: why is it that scuba divers can only have 45 minutes? I don't understand.
I don't know why they didn't have additional oxygen with them on board the rover.
And certainly nothing to recharge the batteries with either. No solar panels or anything like that.
Well,
This is None of the batteries on the equipment were rechargeable. The only rechargeable battery was the one for the central processing station, and it was recharged by the RTG.
And also the coming back to the oxygen, these canisters of oxygen, presumably this was high pressure gas, like a gas. Well, they're spheres, but they were like the gas cylinders you see today, very high pressure. This would have added to the problem we talked about earlier with the vacuum, the interstellar vacuum.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Was it 10 to the power 17 Torr value or whatever? This would have added to it because you'll have something that's actually higher than atmospheric pressure, which has to have some kind of some kind of valve in order to deliver the gas to the astronaut. It has to have some kind of conduit and a valve. They would also have to be able to resist this enormous pressure difference.
Yes. Here's just another example of the exhaust bell housing. This is a 15 showing it's damaged and where it's wrinkled, and these scratches here. This is Apollo 17. They're using the same equipment for all the missions. Just amazing.
Because if they've been doing their job properly, they'd have built a different set for every single mission just to avoid little things like this. They'd have had a different rover, they'd have had a different craft, etc., etc. But maybe they thought, oh, why bother? No one's going to notice. Let's just use the same props over and over again. Let's use the same scenery, the same props, and just hope that no one spots these things.
Well, that's what they thought, but it didn't happen.
Yeah.
There was an interesting presentation at the British Interplanetary Society I went to about a month or so ago by one of the guys who worked on the Hexagon spy satellite, KH-9. And he designed the optical system for the cameras Because it was basically a spy satellite. They was photographing Russia and China and Vietnam and anywhere that America thought the baddies were. The point he made about it was that they were using film, and what they discovered was that if you put film into a vacuum, the emulsion breaks down. So in order to operate the film in the hexagon spy satellites, they had to have the film continuously pressurized. And they did it with a very complicated system of tubing and pipes in which the film was carried. The tubing and pipes were all pressurized with helium gas, albeit at only 1 pound per square inch, but it was still pressure. So every film transport mechanism had to have pressurized tubing around it. Now, obviously, there's magic on Apollo, and the film didn't need to be pressurized. But of course, photographic film will delaminate if you don't put it if you don't put pressure on it, which rather destroys the whole idea of the Apollo cameras, the film cameras and the still cameras, operating in a vacuum, because the film emulsion would just break down. Despite Kodak's insistence that they developed a special thin emulsion for Apollo, which they never actually.
And also, the spy satellite operated in Earth orbit, not as far away as the Moon.
Yes, that's right, it did. And the film had to be dropped out of the satellite and caught in a specially equipped aircraft as it plummeted to the Earth on the end of its parachute. I mean, it was a fairly complex system, but it seemed to work because they got the photographs that they wanted. And until they dropped one of the planes missed one of the canisters. They were called buckets, size of a football. And they had parachutes on them and all the rest of it. And one day the plane missed, and the thing fell into the sea, into 13,000 foot of water.
Oh, no.
And they went and collected it. That's how important it was.
Crikey.
To find something at that depth, I mean, it's rather like finding the Titanic. This was in the mid-1970s, when the Vietnam War was getting hot. So NASA actually gives the game away by declassifying this sort of information. It's only recently been declassified, the spy satellite stuff. And the question I always ask about this stuff is, who's ever heard of the X-37B, the unmanned miniature version of the space shuttle? Where does it go? 712 days it spent on its last mission. Nobody knows where it goes. Nobody knows who controls it. Nobody knows what it's about. And yet, people say secrets can't be kept. Of course secrets can be kept. If national security is at stake, and on Apollo national security was at stake, secrets can be kept. But,
and of course, it's worth noting that NASA is not a civilian organisation; it is a government branch of the military. So everyone will be under this official Secrets Act, essentially.
Yeah, of course they would.
Whatever the American equivalent is.
And also, given the American character, which is admirable in many ways, they would go along with the idea that national security is at stake. We're in the race to beat those damn Ruskies. We'll do what we can. If it means keeping secrets, we'll keep secrets. Which they did.
What are we looking at here now, Scott? Looks like radiation belts?
Marcus can take this one. He can show the different light paths.
Yeah, it's the path through the radiation belts that we're told that the Apollo spacecraft flew through the edge of the radiation belt in order to avoid the worst effects of it. It's strange that you have bad effects some days and not effects other days. The point about that is that given the way the radiation belts are set up around Earth, they're thickest at the equator and thinnest or almost non-existent at the poles. In order to fly through the edge of it, you'd have to go on a polar trajectory. Now, when a spacecraft is launched from Florida. You can see America there on the left of the globe, on the right-hand picture. Florida is near the equator. So when it launches, it flies out across the Atlantic towards Africa. In order to change the trajectory to a polar trajectory, i.e. going up and down, you have to launch from a completely different location on a completely different flight path. But Apollo never did that. Apollo flew on basically an equatorial flight path, not on a polar trajectory.
This is the original.
That's right.
Right here. This is the original. This is what Amy at Vintage Space claims, and this is from the Smithsonian, and they're showing it turning 90 degrees north. And I don't know how you have enough fuel to do that. It's not in the commentary, it's not in the documentation, and it's not in the timeline.
Exactly. So there is no way, once you're set off on your trajectory, you can't just change through 90 degrees. It's not possible. The laws of motion don't allow it for a start. You have to launch in the direction of the trajectory you want to achieve, which is why most of the space shuttle launches that were military and usually would launch into polar orbits were launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. So people didn't actually see where the spacecraft was going. It was all secret.
So they've updated the Apollo missions to this direction now, but they haven't updated the Orion.
There's also another issue to do with these diagrams. Now, I've noticed this on all these diagrams, and I mean, you could put it down to convenience, but on nowhere in these diagrams does it have the words "not to scale." This came up earlier on because you see here that the Earth and Moon, you get the idea that the Earth and Moon were quite close. And I know obviously this is simply a qualitative assessment, but it's enough to sway people's opinions because, as I said earlier, if you really had this to scale, it'd be the equivalent of having the Earth representing a beach ball and the Moon representing a cricket ball and having them about 15 feet apart. The Apollo missions weren't only higher than any other manned space missions, they were many times, hundreds of times higher, further than any other manned space mission. You're talking about 270,000 miles as opposed to just a couple of hundred miles. And when you realise that, it kind of puts it in perspective on a qualitative level. It may open the doors to other questions.
Anyway, there is one more flight path where they're showing them taking off left. I don't just see it here. Yeah, here's one. Taking off to the west and then turning and going down. And of course, they videotaped every launch, so all of them went to the east. I don't know how they can just dream this up and expect people to believe it.
Interestingly, there's never been a complete live stream from launch to the moon all the way through.
No, but you see them going out over the Atlantic Ocean. They didn't go across like this one shows.
Well, what I'm saying is like if it had been a real mission, surely there'd be no problem in live streaming it constantly. You know, there should be some footage, literally from the launch pad.
They can't stream it in 1960s technology like we can today, though.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about is that they did it. They managed to send images to Earth, to Houston, didn't they? They televised images. So why couldn't they have just done that? All streaming means is a flow of information. So if they could send images of them waving and saying hello and welcoming their family and all that kind of thing, why couldn't they have done that all the way through from launch to getting to the moon?
Yeah, because some of the footage inside the capsule was filmed on, I think it was 16mm film camera, which you'd see after the mission. Yeah.
I'm talking about live.
But I don't think they had it. I don't think they had live broadcasts from inside. They might have done. I'm not 100% certain.
I thought they did. Marcus, can you clarify this? I thought they did have live broadcasts.
Yes, that's the subject of Bart Sibrel's film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon.
Yes.
On Apollo 11, where you get Neil Armstrong demonstrating how far away from the Earth they are. And we see that it's actually a transparency stuck on the window.
Of Earth, yeah.
Of Earth.
When the lunar orbiter is talking to Houston, isn't there video footage as well that's supposedly live?
Yes.
I seem to remember kind of like black and white kind of news things like, and now we have images live from the moon, man landing live on the moon. Wasn't that the case?
Yes, there were.
So in theory they could have live streamed. I know live streamed is a modern phrase, but all it means is a flow of information. They could have live streamed all the way from Earth to the moon. There should be, footage that long, for that length.
I imagine they ran out of battery power to do it, because there was a sort of, a couple of hours, I think the transmission was on Apollo 11. On Apollo 12, Al B managed to point the camera directly at the sun, which burnt the lens out, which meant that they couldn't transmit anything. So people got a bit pissed off that their repeats of I Love Lucy were being interrupted, and they complained to NASA. So they had to come up with Apollo 13, which got everybody on the edge of their seat. Great piece of space rescue, that was.
So I thought, maybe I'm wrong, were they using solar panels or not, or is that a later technology?
No.
They were using
Skylab, I think.
Yeah, they were using fuel tanks, fuel cells to generate the energy, which was basically powered by batteries.
What's the solar panel thing on the moon? I thought they left a bit of kit that had solar panels.
Yes, that was on Surveyor 3, which is the unmanned craft which landed about 2 or 3 years before Apollo.
Right, so they did have solar panel technology.
Well, they claim it's solar panel.
I can pull that up.
Yeah, but that's
just before we go to that, I just wanted to show these different images of the Van Allen belts. That additional path where they're skirting around would put them into the second band for a longer period of time going off, depending on which model you're looking at.
Yeah.
Right? You'd actually be in the higher radiation for a longer period of time. And these are some of the newer diagrams that they're showing. And this shows that there's an acceleration of particles to 99% of the speed of light in this area of the belt. Here, this one's showing the glass wall. They're calling it, they've got it lined like it's a brick wall. And they call that the impenetrable barrier at 7,000 miles. And that's just recently found by the Van Allen probes. Okay? Never mind them saying they couldn't saw shooting stars when they were going through or anything else. Right? These are newer findings that weren't there, and they haven't. I don't know how they're going to update their files to say they got through all this stuff.
They'll find a way.
Because it's not in there. I'll pull down to the.
Yes. What was the picture we were going to look at?
The thing on the moon with the solar panels.
That's right.
Surveyor.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Here we go. Special solar panels.
Now you got moisture there, or peeling back surfaces again.
This is Apollo 12. This is the same guy with the wet knee.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and what is remarkable is the Soviet Surveyor is identical to this machine. Even the cutouts up here are identical on her thing. Except when I was looking through their document on it, one side is a solar panel and the other side is supposed to be a high gain antenna.
Uh-huh.
The American version just has two pieces of particle board that are called solar panels.
Yeah, they look like little bits of a table, maybe a wooden board.
Yes.
Looks like they're screwed on underneath. It's like you'd expect from a folding table.
Absolutely. And he wiped his finger across here. It even says in the cup checklist to wipe their finger on all the surfaces. And the panoramic camera, which is being shown here, the mirror at the top, which is focused down, is completely covered in dirt. And he wipes his finger across it to show you that it's completely covered in dirt, which means it wouldn't take a photograph anyway.
Yeah, because as that thing landed, there was presumably a retro rocket to slow it down, which would kick up a bit of dust, which is what we know happens when you fire a rocket as you approach the lunar surface. As Buzz Aldrin says so, kicking up some dust as he lands Apollo 11. So where's all the dust going to go? It's going to probably land back on some of the surfaces.
Where's the displacement crater underneath, as we've seen with the LEM?
Exactly.
That's the problem. Can I ask a question of you guys, actually? And it's more general. But in a scenario where NASA confessed, because this goes, there are some secrets. There are little secrets and there are big secrets, but there are bigger than big secrets. I mean, really, the political structures of the world don't have the capacity to absorb a revelation of this magnitude. This is beyond a scandal. I mean, could you imagine what would happen if NASA just said one day, look, I'm sorry, we faked the moon missions. I'm really, really sorry, we apologise. What would the result be?
Half the universities would still teach it the same way. They just wouldn't believe it.
I reckon so. I reckon you're right. That's it, Scott. It's just like they'll still come up with some reason for saying it wasn't true. And the moon landings had to be real.
Guys, I've got an interesting thing at the moment. One of my friends has just come online. He's a moon hoax believer, and he's actually got a bit of science to do with the Van Allen belt. He's got a science background. Could we bring him in and he can explain why he thinks that we couldn't have got through the Van Allen belt?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Go if you can.
Okay,
go for it.
Okay, his name's Colin. So we'll add him and we'll see if he's online.
Not Colin Philp by any chance?
No.
Oh, good.
Is that showing up on people's thing? I think it's
See,
calling. It
yeah.
might be calling.
Is he actually aware that he's going to be pulled into a conversation?
Yes. I've been having a chat with him. Colin, can you hear me?
Ah.
Hi, Colin.
Hello, Colin.
I can hear you, Colin.
Hey, here we go. CS, it says.
Yeah, it's Colin Sougrin. I've known him for a while. We've had long chats about this kind of thing.
Okay. That'll be interesting.
So let's get this straight. He believes Apollo was real or a hoax?
No, he's got a science background. He doesn't believe that the Apollo landings were real, but he's got a slightly different version of why we couldn't have got through the Van Allen belt. There's a different version. I'm trying to get him to get his. I'll tell you what. Chat amongst yourselves. Apparently he is in the group. Chat amongst yourselves.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Something.
Oh, have you got it?
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to put my video on.
Oh, fantastic. Colin,
I can hear you in the background.
welcome aboard. So you can hear us all. We can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear. Yep.
So
Hi,
we're in fantastic company here. Colin, myself and Neil Geddes-Ward, and we've got Ben Emlyn-Jones, we've got Marcus Allen, and we've got Scott Henderson. So you're in good company. Now, Colin, just very, very briefly, give us your background in science, where you're coming from, maybe what your degrees are, and that kind of thing, first of all.
Okay, I was always interested in science since I was younger. My parents are scientists. My mum then became a teacher. I studied biology, chemistry, physics as A-levels. I did quantum and contemporary physics at university as a degree. I then did a maths and computing degree after that. So that's my science background. I actually studied radiation, studied cosmic rays, etc.
So we're basically in good company. This is somebody who knows his stuff. And is it right that you taught physics for a bit, Colin?
Yeah, I've taught physics. I've taught quite a lot of subjects actually. I've done university lecturing and college lecturing, and I was a teacher for 12 years. So,
Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on very last minute, Colin, but I saw you online and we just got to a section about the Van Allen belt. Now, I think you've got a slightly different take on why it's impossible to get through the Van Allen belt, because the normal theory is because of the high level of radiation. But perhaps you could explain to us why you think it's impossible for the Apollo space mission to actually push through the Van Allen belt.
right, the thing that people don't realise is the Van Allen belt is a giant magnetic system. And the way that it works is by, obviously, ions are going to be positive or negative, and they're going to be either attracted or repelled by a magnetic force. What happens is, if they're repelled, they bounce off, they give energy to the system, and they come off. So they will actually bounce off with less energy than they actually hit with, which means energy has gone into the system. So there's energy being placed into the magnetic system. If they don't get reflected, they get absorbed. If they get absorbed, they get slowed down, the energy's got to go into the system. If they don't get deflected, if they don't get reflected, if they don't get absorbed, they get reflected. So they will, deflected, sorry, so they'll bounce off each other. And that once again gives out kinetic energy. That energy is turned into heat. What people don't really realise is that the system is actually heated up. It's a plasma. It's going to be a massive barrier of ionized charge, which is not only radioactive, it's going to be hot. It's going to be extremely, extremely hot. And it's what's called the thermosphere. And it's called the thermosphere for a reason. It's hot. And people don't ever think about that, because they think that because they can't see it, it doesn't give out heat. So you can't see it there. You can't see it actually glowing. But they don't actually realise that it has heat, it has energy, it has kinetic energy. And the whole point is that anything that's passing through it, that energy will be passed onto that object. So the metal will heat up. The metal will heat up, the people will heat up. That's a tremendous amount of heat. That's a tremendous amount of energy for you to go through. You can have systems which unless they are very well insulated, will fail. And that's also the same thing with the radiation. It's not only about the people, it's about the fact that the systems will fail. Because you've got to remember, it's the 1960s. You've got to remember how, this is back when you could actually destroy a hard drive with a magnet. This is back when, if you bumped your computer system, this computer system will fail. And that was any type of system. You can look it up. They were so fragile. Yeah, fragile and precious. And that's the reason why nobody was allowed into computer rooms except the physicists and scientists. It wasn't, you didn't have ordinary people working with computers. It just wasn't the way it was. And even though this thing is passing through and nobody's going to touch it, you've got to remember that it's going to be extraordinarily sensitive to all kinds of. And since this was a mission which is critical, there's no way they would have done it. I mean, the fact is, there's no way that you would have sent human beings into that system for it to fail. There's no way that you've got one chance to hit the moon, and I'm sorry, but there's no way that they will film it. There's no way they will film it, because there's too much of a high chance of failure. So all of that goes into the same box. I mean, the fact is that the Van Allen belt was not possible to go past. And it's being shown repeatedly from all the systems which are being created by the Chinese and the Russians, etc. And the amount of shielding they're talking about, and the fact that they're talking about the Van Allen belt, and the fact that NASA talks about the Van Allen belt, and how one day they will be able to get through it. Well, if one day you will be able to get through it, that means you haven't gone through it in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the way you described it, Colin, was it was like the astronauts and the Apollo missions would be under a barrage of like electromagnetic soup. I think was a description.
They'll be fried. Everything would be fried. I mean, they'd be fried. They really would be fried. And the fact is that, I'm sorry, but 1960s technology, and I've really researched this. I've looked into stuff which has been released since. I've been trying to find if there's any form of secret technology which has not been released since. And it doesn't seem as if there is. There was no way of going through it. There was nothing which existed at the time which would allow them to go through it, because at this moment in time, they're trying to deal with it. So...
And one of the things NASA say is we haven't got the technology to go back to the moon. I'm just gobsmacked.
Yeah, you haven't got the technology to do it. It's just not possible. It'd be like flying through a welding arc. That's what it's like. It's the same plasma effect of going through a welding torch. And that's around about 4,000 degrees.
Now, Scott and Marcus, this is an excellent opportunity to ask an actual physicist any kind of like questions you may have to ask. So, far away, Colin knows his stuff.
Okay, thanks, Colin. That was a very interesting, brief summary. One question I have is, at what height above the Earth's surface would this effect start to be felt?
If I can remember, it's around about 80 miles. It's quite far out. I can't remember exactly, and I'm not going to Google it. So it's approximately around about 80 miles if I remember. So it's quite far out. So the fact is, that's the reason why you've got things like low Earth orbit and mid Earth orbit and satellite height. So you can have satellites, etc., which aren't they're still within the belt and still quite far out. I don't think people actually realise how far out our atmosphere actually goes. Because if you include the banana belt, our planet actually extends quite far out. And so that's the reason why people don't really discuss it, and you don't really need to worry about it when you're talking about satellites and when you're talking about...
How far out is the ISS?
That's really close. That's damn close. That's something like 20... Oh, God. Wait a second, I'm going to Google all this stuff. I can tell you. Wait a second. ISS height. It's not very high at all.
250 miles.
Is it?
Yes.
Orbit height. So, Colin, can unmanned satellites, like TV station satellites, that sort of thing, can they be protected and insulated from the effects that would be created in the thermosphere?
They aren't. They don't go through the thermosphere, so they're not really. When they do actually go through the thermosphere, they're usually protected. They are usually protected, and they're usually quite heavily protected. And
what kind of protection, Colin, are you aware of? Is it some kind of lead sheeting or some kind of other Faraday cage or something that works? What do they do?
They use a mixture of Faraday cages and things like mesh sheeting on the circuitry. I was only looking at that today, actually. So they put boards and that type of thing across the circuitry, and they use plastics. They use quite a lot of organic plastics because plastics obviously are insulators, and then there'll be insulators from ionization and etc. So they use a mixture of plastics and other insulators to actually protect the system.
So this be presumably like a...
But let me say, there's a hell of a lot of satellites that trail, and people don't ever mention failures, but there's a lot of satellites which fail, and that's usually the reason why. And there's a lot of missions which fail when they're going outside of the system. You know, when they're sending something to Mars, etc. When they're sending probes, there's quite a lot of them that fail, and they rarely mention this type of thing. You have to look up satellite failure, and it's not something which is broadcast.
And presumably the probes that get sent to Mars and Venus and Jupiter and Saturn, etc., they've got like similar protections.
Well, if you notice that when they usually do those things, the satellite, etc., is usually within a capsule, and it doesn't usually come out of the capsule until quite far out. So they'll do the separation of all the boosters, etc., and then the last bit, which is usually the housing for a capsule or for the astronauts, etc., is usually left on while they pass through, which will allow protection. Then it comes off and they do whatever they need to do. They don't have to, and since it's an inanimate object, you don't have to worry so much about radiation, blah, 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 blah. You don't have to worry about the circuitry, but you don't have to worry about the actual metal housing and all the rest of that stuff. As long as it's designed in such a way that it's not going to melt, then you're fine. It'll just pass straight through.
What sort of height above the Earth's surface would this effect be most prominent?
What height?
Yeah.
I need to find the height of start of. It's not going to be. Put it this way. Before I even look, if you think about it, it's a magnetic shield which has quite a large area to it, and the thing is that the whole point is that most things coming in are going to stop at the beginning, or be at least slowed down by the middle. So the middle and the top part of it, so the outer part, will be hotter than the inner part. The part of the magnetic field facing the Earth will be less hot than the part of the magnetic shield, which is on the outside, because that's obviously getting hit by all the particles.
Okay.
And the problem that you have is that you can't really say a height. It's kind of a boundary, because it changes, it fluctuates. It can get extraordinarily large, and it can get extraordinarily thin, depending.
Okay.
And the thing is, it depends on the sun's activity. The more activity the sun has, the hotter it's going to be, because obviously there's going to be more particles hitting it, so it's going to be more active. It gets larger. That's the whole point of it. It expands outwards, which also adds more padding. Because seeing that the sun is giving out more radiation, it's going to take more to stop it. So the field gets larger. You see how it all balances out naturally.
Yeah, and also the Apollo missions actually took place during the solar maximum. So in terms of the solar sunspot cycle, it was when the sun was most active and there was the most risk, not only from this that you've described, Colin, but also from coronal mass ejections and X-ray emissions from the sun.
They would have been fried. I mean, seriously, they're talking about how when they're in low Earth orbit, they're talking about how they can see the electrons and neutrons going through their eye. and then they're talking about going out into mid space. That is just not going to happen. I mean, the amount of bombardment they will receive would be absolutely unbelievable. And also the fact is that if you actually look at the crafts and the way the craft is designed, and I know they talk about how they put plastic sheeting. It's supposed to be layered. It was supposed to be layered, but if you look at the layering, I mean, even with I'll give a prime example on Earth. A prime example is the way that depleted uranium works on tanks. Like when it hits the outside of the tank, it will cause radiation to hit the outside of the tank, which passes radiation through the tank. So the radiation on the outside will bounce the electrons out on the inside of the tank. So people get fried on the inside of the tank. It basically bounces around, allows radiation to bounce around within the tank, and that's another part of being killed by depleted uranium. And the whole point is that you've got this capsule going out there, and yeah, it's got a certain amount of shielding, but you're going to have all kinds of crap bouncing around inside the capsule as well. So, and by design, it doesn't really look as if that's really something which is being dealt with. So I personally don't think they went. I mean, even down to, this is on another site, I mean, someone posted a photograph today about the moon, and even if you look at the photographs, I mean, the fact is that the other one is no stars. If you take a photograph anywhere on Earth at night, you'll get stars in the photograph. There's no atmosphere on the moon, so there's nothing to stop any stars. The stars would be as bright as hell.
Marcus, you'd probably agree with that as well, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's a very good point. It's certainly possible to photograph stars at night on Earth, obviously if you're not too near a street lamp. But on the moon, you would expect the sight of the stars overhead would be absolutely fantastic.
Now, the skeptics always rebuke. They say, well, the surface of the moon was so bright due to the contrast of the photograph. Of course, you're not going to see the stars.
They say it's daylight, don't they?
Yeah, they say it's overpowered by the.
Well, yes, if you're photographing the directly illuminated surface of the moon, you won't get the stars in the same picture. So just point your camera up slightly.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I was about to say. Just point it upwards.
Yes. Which would then immediately get the, if you set the camera exposure and shutter speed correctly, you will get the stars. I mean, that's the way you photograph them on Earth. You set it for the illumination levels that you want to record. On the moon, if you're photographing the surface, stars won't appear. That's not in question. I mean, that's straight optics. But you can photograph the stars if you took the time to do so. And on Apollo 16, there is supposedly a camera that was used to photograph the Earth in, I think it was infrared, which is supposed to show the stars as well. Scott's probably got the picture of the camera.
Far
Oh, it's
ultra.
the telescope that they put in the shadow of the lunar module.
That's right. It was in the shadow of the lunar module. And have you seen the photographs that thing took?
Yeah.
They're not very persuasive in terms of what they show.
What's interesting is they took 20. There's 27 photographs online,
Okay.
and they only attended the camera 11 times on the 3 EVAs. So they're time-lapse cameras, anywhere between a minute and a half to 200 minutes. One of them is, and they only attended the camera 11 times during the 3 missions, but they got 27 photographs. I don't know who was resetting it the rest of the time.
Well, it's probably Douglas Trumbull.
Or Jones.
Oh,
Colin,
Jones, yes.
we've come across an image of the flag that appears to
He
be
might have been
wet.
on holiday. I'll come up with the far ultra camera here in a second.
Okay. Colin, we came up with a photograph of the American flag that was a bit wet. There seems to be wet patches. Would you concur that if let's say it was wet within the lunar lander and they brought it into that atmosphere, the vacuum would just completely destroy all the moisture and suck it away?
Yeah, evaporate. It'll evaporate in seconds. The same as if you stepped out without a spacesuit, all the water will evaporate off your mouth and out your eyes, and then you'll freeze, and then you'll crack and die. Well, you'll be dead before that, but anyway. So it just doesn't. The whole point is, I think the reason why NASA the reason why they all get away with all this rubbish is because people are so bad at maths, they're so bad at science that they just accept it. And with Hollywood movies, with all their portrayal showing bad science, people believe any crap which they're told. And the thing is that all of this is very, very this is basic science. It's all basic science. I mean, the magnetism is basic. You do that when you're doing your GCSEs. Light, you do that when you're doing your GCSEs. Water evaporation and vacuum, you do that if you did chemistry and you did your GCSEs. All GCSE maths and science. And nobody's really sat down and actually thought about half of this stuff.
It's just bizarre.
There's the far ultra camera right there.
Yeah.
And they claimed they had to keep it close enough to keep it in the shade. They couldn't have this thing sitting in the sun. And it took a few shots of the Earth. And there are 27 photographs of it, but they actually only came up to it. Right now it's just pointing at the LEM, and they said they couldn't point it that way. So it's just sitting there as a display model.
Oh, Scott, could you bring up the footage of the astronaut falling over, and then he calls his mate over to help him up, and it looks like there's kind of wires hoiking him up.
That's 100% wires. I've seen it 101 times, and I've really looked at that one. That is 100% wires. You can see even the direction that the light is coming off. If you look at it, you can actually see the instruments of where the light is coming from. That is definitely a wire. And you can even look into blue screen stuff that Hollywood does, and their wires do exactly the same thing.
There's where they hook the wires on. That's right at the waistband.
Yeah, you can see it as it tugs on the suit. You can actually see the waistband.
Yeah.
I mean,
Have you got the actual footage, Scott? Do you know this? Have you got the footage at all?
No, I don't have it right handy.
Okay, no worries.
Somebody else plays with that. Here's the inner boot that some people were saying didn't leave the proper track. Right?
I see. Yeah, that went inside the moon boot, yeah.
Yeah, and I got a full shot of the outer ones as well here.
We haven't yet got on to the cars on the moon, which sounds like Sunday sport material, but honestly, Scott's...
Is it a Nazi Elvis landing a car on a UFO?
Not quite, but he's found a few classic cars on the moon. Honestly, this is true. It sounds rubbish, but when Scott pulls up the pictures, you'll see what I mean.
Okay, let's
have a look. We'll go right to them now.
Yeah. Show us, Scott. This is.
By the way, Colin, thanks for coming on the show. We're glad to have you on board.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Very helpful.
That's cool. I'm glad that people want to hear.
Right,
that's Apollo 11.
Okay, so this would be a car that's covered in like the artificial dust or something they create to cover.
That was not covered up by much.
No. You
That's
still
just
see
way off
shape
in
of
the
it.
distance. It's right underneath that arrow there.
Yeah.
You zoom in at the horizon, and I mean, if you see a moon rock that looks like that, that's got side windows on it, and
Wheel arches.
To me, it looks like a Nissan hut, bizarrely.
Yeah. Yeah.
well, they didn't have that particular. I just put a shot of a car down here just to show you it's a car. That's one of Buzz Aldrin's cars. GM gave them all matching Corvettes, eh? All the astronauts.
This is good. This one.
That's. I'm not sure it's a car,
I really
but
don't
it's
need
odd.
to say too much. There's one that's upside down behind there. You know, there's more over in here on it.
Are you actually serious? There's supposed to be cars on the moon.
Well, I think what they're saying is that was this actually filmed in like a junkyard or something? That
This
just
is the junkyard.
that's covered in dust and
In Arizona. In Arizona.
Yeah, I think it's Arizona as well. Because the reason why was because when I was looking at when they were doing the Mars training, and if you look at the train of the Mars training, it's almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
Scott, could you bring up the browser? Can you bring up at like Firefox or something and go to YouTube?
Oh, we're going to look at the astronaut getting pulled up.
Yeah, I want to look at the hoiking. I want us to look at that because that is pretty damning.
Well, the thing with that is that once again goes against the laws of physics because it's the way his body moves upwards. You can't.
It would be something like astronaut wires. I think will probably bring it.
Because the only way he could ever do that manoeuvre in the position and posture that he does it is if he levitates. Or if he has thrusters in his head.
If you put wire and then put the word astronaut in, you might be able to get it. Oh, astronaut wires. There we go. There's here we go.
Astronauts moving in slow motion is another hallmark of the
This is David Percy.
There's no evidence at all of any astronaut making a leap or a jump anywhere near a height commensurate with 1 in 6G possibilities. If they were actually simulating UVA's life, they would then need help with their bulky heavyweight suits and backpacks in order to achieve the visual effect of moving around easily in gravity. They enter wire supports. This is a tried and tested way of relieving weight from performance, or even flying an actor. Here's a sequence from one of their own productions.
Excuse me, will I need a car?
Relax, Chris. We're only making a short journey back to 1968, to the beginning of the universe.
Is this the one you want to see, or do you want to see them? Just...
Not quite. I'm off to the actual. I think if you skip it forwards a little bit to get to the moon, the actual moon bit. But there's one where one of the astronauts falls over and he gets his mate to help him up.
That's the one. That's the
Back a bit. Back a bit. Back. There you go. Let's go from here.
On Apollo 16, we have an astronaut who's about to get up.
Okay, here we go.
Let me give you a hand, Sex.
Look at that. Look at that. Look at that.
Look at it again. The astronaut is getting up with the wire taking the weight.
Yeah. He just slides up on 1 foot, doesn't he?
Now, I don't know if Paul Daniels was helping him on the moon or David Copperfield.
There's a...
What do you think, guys? What do you think of that?
Totally. You can see it being tugged and pulled. And I mean, it's perfectly possible to do that, to have wires on the film set and for them not to be visible on the recording, because, I mean, he gives an example of his own production, David Percy. For example, it's about using colour screen overlay. Yet, if you look at the film Mary Poppins, you can, which was actually made about the same time as the
time. Good point.
You see the eponymous character played by Julie Andrews actually flying down to the house where she's going to be the nanny, and you get some good close-up shots of her actually in the air, suspended, apparently levitating. Yeah,
Wow.
she was on wires, and these do not show up on the film.
Now, Colin, you were talking earlier about there was some indicators about blue screen technology. Can you go into that a little bit, because I've not heard that actually.
I don't think it was this one. I think it was when we were talking about the ISS. We were talking about the blue screens.
Oh, okay. We'll stick to the moon for the moment. Scott, is there anything you want to add or ask Colin about at all?
No, I think that pretty much covers that. I just wanted to show a little more of the poor condition of the equipment that they claim to have brought to the moon.
Go for it.
Fairly quickly. Yeah. Like this is the central processing station, right? You can see that it's just stuck with mud, covered with rust.
Oh wow!
Absolutely nothing inside of it.
What was supposed to be inside of it?
This is the central processing station.
So
all of the equipment for all the experiments are powered by this machine. If you can call this a machine. This machine retrieves all of the data, then it has to send it back to Earth.
Wow. Okay,
it's got the transmitters supposed to be in there, everything's supposed to be there. A great big pack of battery is supposed to be 36-volt batteries, twice the size of a car battery. Is supposed to be in there, and the RTG is supposed to be powering it.
Could it be argued that those parts were in there, but they've taken them out and they've distributed them or used them elsewhere? Could that be argued?
This is just after they set it up.
Right.
Brand new, out of the box, set up and took. They set it up and took a picture of it after they set it up when they got to the moon.
It doesn't look very straight, does it? That top looks a bit wonky.
No, that is very wonky.
It looks like it's been dropped, perhaps with a lunar module.
This is how it was prepared. This is the experimental package, right? The experiments are on the top. Mm-hmm. This thing is supposed to convert in and power everything, and that's all they did is a frame. You can see there's mold all over it. This is just an old piece of equipment that they were practicing with here on Earth and filmed it here on Earth.
I just can't believe that's supposed to be new. That looks like something that's 10 years old in a junkyard.
Prepared in a clean room. A NASA clean room.
Bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
Same as this equipment.
The other one, because you mentioned transmission, that's another one which I don't think anyone really thought about.
This is the antenna. This is the antenna. It worked as a barbell for them to transport it out and then became the antenna.
Right. Yeah, carry on, Colin.
Well, my thing was data transmission.
Yeah.
And voice transmission. That's another one, the amount of time we were taking, the distance that you're at. I don't think anybody's really thought about that. It's not something which they really cover, there's no delay.
Right. There's actually water here. There's actually water standing here. Water that's dried back and the mud stuck to it here with green mold around the outside. This one's been laying around so long it's all peeled up here and it's curled back. You can't tell me they just took it out, set it up, and took a photograph of it.
What would be the delay in communications between Moon and Earth, realistically, Colin?
You have to take into that any electromagnetic wave is traveling at the speed of light, but then you've got the fact that you're quite far away, so it's going to take first of all seconds and then minutes. The further away you are, I mean, from the moon, it's probably going to take about a minute for any transmission to go there and come back.
Right.
As you're going out, I mean, it's going to take seconds once you start getting outside the Van Allen belt.
Right.
So there will be a delay. There'll be a definite delay on any communication, and there'll be a delay on any data being sent. And you've also got, that's the one I'd really like to know. I'm actually going to look into that in a second. I want to know what type of data they were sending. So how large was the data packet? So,
yeah.
Because how much data can you send over a certain amount of time? And the fact is that it's 1960s, so bandwidth wasn't very large.
Marcus, do you know the official, when Nixon was talking to the men on the moon, or I think they're supposed to have called Nixon, do you know if there was like a minute delay between them talking?
In the recording of the conversation that they had, it was about a 2 or 3 minute conversation.
Yeah.
It's mainly Nixon talking. There's very few to and fro's between Nixon and Armstrong. there does appear to be a slight delay, and if we're talking about the speed of light, which Colin was, we're saying that it would take, given the distance to the moon, about 1.3 seconds each way. So there should be an appreciable delay in a question being asked and the answer being received. There'll be a minimum speed of light transmission.
Yeah.
But then, if you're talking about plasma, which we are talking about it earlier, does plasma slow down transmission frequencies time?
It will affect anything with energy. Anything with energy. That's the whole point of it. That's the whole point of the magnetic field and the whole point of the plasma. It's supposed to prevent magnetism and ions coming through and hitting us. That's the whole point of it. So it would slow down transmission. It's one of those things which, if you look into satellite failure, that's one of the ones I looked into. There's a really good article, see if I can find it. There's a PDF on satellite failure and the reasons why satellites fail. And that is one of the largest reasons why satellites fail. Is because of the ionization. And because they lose transmission quite often during solar storms for that very reason, because the ionosphere becomes highly charged, and so it starts bouncing and degrading signals. So once again, it's another, it would affect it. I mean, anything like that will, since we're talking about physics, then that means we're talking about, like for instance, the speed of light and the distance, and how that one small thing will, I mean, it's minuscule, but it does affect it. In the same way, the magnetic field will affect it. It may be minuscule, but it will affect it.
Okay, that's the point. Because this famous live television transmission from the lunar surface, presumably the frequency on which it was being transmitted would be affected by the magnetic field around Earth and by the plasma field around Earth. But yet there doesn't appear to be any record of that occurring or even being reported.
Exactly. And the other one you would notice, seeing that astronauts talk about cosmic rays passing through their eyes as they're traveling around in ISIS, then obviously you would have the same effect on cameras, because you would have the fact that any background radiation would affect any code in the cameras, and if they made a specialized camera, it would hit the soiloids in the back of the camera. Same way as if you look up any videos on any cameras going to nuclear power plants, or another one is the cameras of 9/11. When that one's hit, you can see scintillation on the picture, but there doesn't seem to be any form of interference at all in any of the pictures or in any of the camera work. It's all extremely clear, no flickering, no nothing. And the thing is that even when they do reasonably modern ones, if you look through the satellite imagery of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, you still got scintillation, you still got forms of degradation on the pictures.
Right.
So, and the thing is, as I said, this is 30 years before. So I'm sorry, Polaroids were good, but they're not that good.
Yeah. No, in fact, that's one of the major arguments against the whole idea of anything to do with landing man on the moon. They say they did a television transmission live. For a start, there wasn't enough battery power to operate the cameras and do the transmission. And it's highly unlikely that the transmission would have reached Earth in a way that would be transmittable without some major interference.
Thank you. Unless the signal's being boosted. And in the 1960s, once again, there weren't enough. I mean, now you could bounce off a satellite. There weren't enough satellites out there for them to be able to do that type of thing. And there's no report of them doing that type of thing, because they would have been, I mean, that's one of those things they would have gone on about, oh, how we bounced off a signal, and, we repeated the signal, and it would have been one of those great scientific breakthroughs, and they would have advertised that like mad, especially since it was the burst of the Russians, how they picked it back off one system onto another one. They would have gone on about it, especially being America. But there's no mention of it.
No, all. And also the fact that the moon itself is spinning, the Earth is spinning. So,
Yes.
So to receive a signal from the moon with the accuracy required for a television picture would require a movable antenna. And the Earth spins at, 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. So you're going to have to, for a 5-minute transmission, you're going to have to move it quite a distance to record it.
Mm.
And how did they even do the calculation to work out that given that the moon is spinning as well, where on earth the antenna would have to be to receive this? Because it's got to be direct line of sight.
Sights. Thank you.
Mm.
Yep.
So they wouldn't argue, Marcus and Colin, that the signal was spread out in like a cone shape, and the cone shape was so large it could be picked up anywhere on Earth. Would that be an argument? I don't know about these things, by the way.
Right, Andrew. The best way to put that is, if something is in a straight line, it's concentrated.
Yeah.
If you take the same mass of anything and spread it out,
yeah,
it's going to become thin.
Yeah, it's going to be weaker.
Be weaker.
Yeah.
It's called the inverse square law.
But could they argue that that's why the pictures of the moon are very grainy and very kind of like very bad quality, because that was going on?
They could.
Mm.
That's your word against theirs.
I'm playing devil's advocate to kind of try and see what the counter arguments might be, and if we can counter the counter.
They would also say that those large dishes were there to capture the faintest of signals as well.
Yeah, they could say that. See, there's 101 things that they could say. Yeah, that is one of those things which could be argued.
Mm-hmm. Scott, what are we looking at here? Just give us a rundown of what we're looking at. This broken rain guard. This is interesting.
I think you're on mute, Scott.
Scott, you're on mute at the moment. That's it. There you go.
Yes, there I am.
Okay, we can hear you.
This is the CSM. There's a rain guard on it. Why would there be a rain guard on a CSM? There's no rain in space. When I was looking back through the report server, one of the tests they were doing in the vacuum chamber burst this window out. Okay, broke the seals on the window, just burst it right out. So they literally have just duct taped it back into place, put a rain guard on it because it was still leaking. And on the right-hand picture is water, and the water's in between the two layers of glass, and the paint's peeling up in between. But this photograph is said to be taken halfway to the moon.
Right.
Claimed to be in zero gravity, so there's water running down in zero gravity. Shouldn't do that, and it's minus 250 degrees outside, so it should just freeze.
No, there's no atmosphere, so it'll just disappear. It'll boil.
Well, if it's in between and it's broken, everything's going. There won't be any be able to keep an atmosphere inside that craft either, right?
Oh, well, they're saying that it's in between the two sheets, like when water gets stuck in between your double glazing.
Yeah, but the complete seal has broken on the glass, so you can't keep air inside this craft either.
Yeah, they'll be dead. That window would have been sucked out. It would just suck the side of the craft out.
Well,
it's going to be the weakest point.
It blew out in an 8-pound pressure test.
Exactly.
And that's why they claim they only had to keep 5.5 pounds of air pressure inside the vehicle.
Well, that's bullshit straight away. People should be listening to this stuff, man.
Scott, just out of interest, because I missed the first hour, just give me a brief rundown of like your history, how you got into this, and kind of where you're coming from, out of interest.
I'm a chef by trade, and I'm as sharp as my knives. I've always been interested in space ever since I was a kid, and when I started in high school, that was in 1969. And of course, the science teachers, that's all we talked about mostly in science class, We watched MIT videos. We watched all the Apollo stuff, everything else. And I've always had an interest in it. I've always kept up with all their space news and everything else kind of thing. And when I first started hearing about it was a hoax, I had to find out for myself. Okay? And I literally dove into the Apollo archive site. So I looked at all their stuff on the report server, and I've downloaded every ground photograph of the Apollo missions on it. And I've studied many thousands of hours studying these photographs.
NASA must love you.
Okay? And the fact of the matter is, I had to find out. I'm like everybody else. I believe they went to the moon, and I'd very much like it to be true today. But it just didn't happen. I mean, it just breaks your fantasy. You're sitting looking at a nose cone of a missile right here. And it's got a painted nose cone on it, sitting right back in there. That's a car up on its side. You can see there's two cars sitting there.
So do you think literally they were like, we need some big junk to be moon rocks. We'll just go and grab some junk off like a military base of discarded stuff and just cover it in dust.
This is their own waste dump.
Yeah.
This is their own equipment. There's all kinds of heavy machinery and everything else in it. That's the Bentley right there, and they even mentioned that in the audio. They're talking about it.
I mean, even if somebody could say that's not a missile nose cone, it is an odd round shape, and you don't get symmetrical odd round shapes in. Yeah, it's too round, and it's too because there could be two theories on this. It could either be a junkyard or something, or it could be like alien technology. But it's certainly not a natural rock that you'd find on the moon.
There's a chain right there, gear chain on it.
Yeah.
And look at this thing. It's got a bucket arm, like a scissor arm.
Yeah.
This is very bizarre.
Adding to what you said, one of the things that people, one of the reasons why you're not going to get any round things is because there's nothing to round it.
There's no wind. Yeah.
There's no wind, there's no water. So there's nothing that's going to turn things into pebbles. Nothing's going to be rounded.
What the hell is that?
Everything's going to be sharp.
This is the Indian head, isn't it, Scott?
Yes, it is. And you could say it's just an unusual rock, like they do in the Mars, thing like that.
Could be Mother Teresa as well. Could Mother Teresa.
Headband on it.
Nuns on the Moon, a new movie.
I've got the paint can too, so don't worry about it.
Neil, what's that word for where you view things and your mind creates it, like
parabola or something like that.
Something like that.
Parabolics or something.
Parabolics, it's something like that.
Yeah, I was told I could see rabbits in the clouds. And then, of course, Einstein saw the same ones, and he managed to follow their tracks back to their birth.
That's interesting. That's not normal.
This one brings me
This is GC right there on the bottom of the bag. Okay, that's just a ball bag for when you go to the driving range and you grab 100 balls and you go out. They made little like golf ball bags like that, and GC just means golf course. I worked on a golf course. I know. I've seen them.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
We had the same ones.
I'm gonna Google GC golf bags.
Well, it just means golf course for the golf course. It's just a ball bag.
For the golf course, yeah. And this is that was the photo that had the famous orange juice spilt over it, I believe. I saw the stain in there previously.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's it. Yeah, the orange juice of Apollo 17.
Can someone just explain the story about that? Because I'm aware of it, but I think somebody knows. Some of you guys might know the details of it about why the orange juice spillage disproves that they were.
It was something to do with changing the film magazines out on a mission or something.
He claims that the stains got on because they were using wet wipes.
Yeah.
They were changing the magazines, and you can't really use a wet wipe in a vacuum, can you?
An orange juice spilt out of the helmet, and it stuck their helmet, and they had trouble getting the helmet off. And so, obviously, if orange juice got into the space helmet, it means it wasn't a very good seal. Obviously, if you're going out in space or into a vacuum, but you've got orange juice seeping into the seal between your helmet and the suit, it means that if orange juice could get in there, your air
How
could
did it get on the magazine? How did it get on the camera?
Yeah. Okay. What was the next slide, Scott? After this one, it was the the sea rock again.
Yeah, except this is Apollo 11. It's sitting right there off to the flag, off the side of the flag. This is the Apollo 16 sea rock, and this is it again. And I've found the same rock in 5 out of 6 missions, which just shows that they're shooting on the same location. Okay, this is they actually had to trench this rock to make it stand up, and they're showing how they sprayed the material on here. Just either plaster or concrete mold that they have this on here. And whatever piece of steel, this piece of steel right here is this, and there's rope tied around it all the way down. Okay, there's also another steel bar sticking out there. On the other side of this, there's a chunk of a car tire on it as well. I didn't show that to you. That's one way they made the rocks. Here's another way they made the rocks, just using a wire mesh and putting the mold over it.
I know about that one.
And this is only in Apollo 15. You'll see rocks like this, kind of a blue rock on the thing. But while we have this rock up, because it's completely devoid of anything, if you imagine the Earth has cosmic dust coming onto it every year, enough to fill a baseball stadium size, or about 3 million oil barrels full of cosmic dust. Is landing on the Earth every year. Okay, the moon has the same thing happening to it, except there's no wind.
Yeah.
1/6 gravity, so the stuff is going to land very light, and it doesn't have anything pushing down on top of it. On Earth, we have the Earth's atmosphere on top of that pushing down, which is 10 tons per square meter at sea level. That's how much pressure the atmosphere has on top. The moon doesn't have that. There's no wind, there's no rain, there's no nothing to push it off.
Can I use this as a point I wanted to bring up? Dust. That's another one. There would have been so much dust within the module. There would have been so much dust within the suits. And that dust would have mopped up everything, because especially as I was saying before, they had a lot of very sensitive material in there. Plus, you've got no gravity. That stuff's going to be bouncing around and blowing around inside your capsule.
Yes, but this dust has been falling on the moon for 3.8 billion years.
Yeah.
Right?
So
how
dust.
thick would it be? It has to be on top. Every shot you see with a bare rock, okay, is just an error in simulation.
Mm-hmm.
I've never thought about that.
Even
really.
if you say it's only a few inches thick, it's got to be
on everything.
More than that. It's filled in the craters on the moon. You can see it in the telescope. You can see a fresh crater impact, or a recent one has the radial striations coming out from it. I mean, the older ones are being filled in with this lunar dust, the cosmic dust coming down onto it, or dust from other impact craters.
Colin's right. I mean, what happens if you have a dusty spacesuit and you bring it into a spacecraft with sensitive electrical equipment?
It's radioactive.
Yeah.
And they jump out of their suits. They jump out of their suits in the spacecraft, and the radioactive dust is all over their bodies. And then they bring 2 kilos of radioactive rock on it, and they travel back from the moon for 3 days. Okay? The dust won't settle. They're in zero gravity. They're going to be breathing it in. It'll be in their eyes. It'll be in everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Would somebody like Brian Cox be saying, aha, but they've of course got oxygen filters and air filters that would remove the dust?
This is radioactive dust as well. There's the oxygen filters, etc. Right. The whole point of radioactivity and dust, if that gets into your body in any shape or form, you're fucked. You can read that anywhere. That's the whole point of radioactivity. Alpha particles, beta particles, gamma rays. The whole point is that your skin is supposed to protect you from A and B. It doesn't protect you from G, but it does supposed to protect you from A and B. The main problem is when you inhale it. When you get it into your blood system, if you get it into cuts, if you get it into your nose, if you get it into your eyes. That's the whole point. You can read that anywhere. That's the major problem with radioactivity.
Yeah, even around Chernobyl, they still wear masks, so they can't breathe it in, just anything that's blowing around.
And we're talking microscopic. We're talking about, if you just get a couple of atoms of that stuff in there, this stuff is pretty lethal. It's pretty harsh because it's giving out one atom is giving out a very large amount of energy. So even if it's only one atom, it's going to destroy a lot of cells.
My brother actually went to Chernobyl, and he took some old clothing which he bought, and he did the whole tourist thing, went round there, and when he got back, I think he burnt the whole lot or destroyed the whole lot.
Did he have a little radiation check when he came out? Or
They had a Geiger counter. Everyone had a Geiger counter, and they went around. And
they make you wear them.
Yeah. It's basically it's safe-ish, but it's not totally safe. You don't.
I can't believe it's a holiday destination as such.
That is very popular. I can understand why. It's fascinating. I've been to Moscow, Neil. It's probably the best holiday I've had. It's no sun or beach, but it's a fascinating place to be.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Oh, definitely.
Here's a little cartoon Alan did on it. I put this picture in. This is from Apollo 12, and this piece of plastic, whatever it is, that they put down under the gnome. And Alan Bean saying, "I bet you a dime this stuff is a real moon rock." Little cartoon. So they're already joking around about it. Back then.
Colin, are you aware
We'll pull this one off as the last one here. I stitched together these 3 photographs to show you the layout that they did on it. This is the layout from the press kit. So when you're looking down here at the front, it's shooting towards the front here. In here, they're showing arrows up and down and side to side so they can move the scenery, the background sceneries. This is how they built the set. It's in the press kit. The arrows are there to show that they can move these mountains up and down or side to side. Okay. They already had the view of the commander's window and the entire scene here drawn out. And if you realize that every mission had at least 5 alternate landing sites, there's no way they could put this out in the press kit in this much detail. But that shows you exactly how they laid out the sceneries. The entire map is right there.
So a question. Let's say that the Chinese or the Japanese or the Indians independently send their own probes to the moon with high accuracy, high definition photography, and they photograph the moon landing site with all the objects, the rover, etc., all their bits of kit in place. What do we do with our position if that were to happen?
Well, first of all, they're not going to be able to send the images back. The inverse square law won't allow that to happen. Okay, they don't have enough power to send a signal that far. And if you
do now.
They do now. Power bands rely, just go to any of the SETI websites and it'll show you the different wavelengths it takes just to get through the ionosphere.
Yeah, to get through the atmosphere. But the thing is now that that's something. Power is something which is not a problem now because there's a lot of new power outputs which haven't actually been released commercially, and they're very powerful. A lot of mini fusion reactors, mini fission reactors, different types of batteries, all kinds of things. So that's maybe they will be able to do it, and they may use laser technology as well. They use a laser to fire it through. It's like what we were talking about before, Andrew. So you use a straight line point to send your data. That could work. Now,
okay.
Well, then they'll find that there's nothing there.
I was just about to say, but if they you did ask how would we stand? I would automatically start looking like mad for what technology has not been released. I'll look through all the patents, because the only way they'll be able to do that is if there's things that they have not ever released, that they're never going to mention.
I mean, Marcus is aware of this. Marcus, they have done a flyby, but the only photos they've given us are tiny little pixels. It's unbelievable.
Exactly, which is the point. Which is the point I made when we had dear Peter on, and he said, "Well, they've taken photographs of the landing sites," and maybe I got a little bit over enthusiastic about showing how ridiculous that statement was. I said, surely they got better equipment flying at 30 kilometers above the lunar surface. And he was then talking about the Hubble Space Telescope. I maybe just misunderstood what I said. Because from 30 kilometers, which is what the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter claims to have been flying at, they were taking these photographs which show, as I said, a couple of pixels with a bloody great arrow saying landing site.
I was just gobsmacked, Marcus. We live in an era of iPhones and nanotechnology and the Hubble Space Telescope, and yet what they give us as evidence of the moon landings is something that's about 6 pixels wide and wide.
Going lower.
They did a Google Maps. They did a Google Maps job. Yeah, why not?
It's just
One.
There it is. Isn't that fantastic? This is proof. This is proof.
Yeah, that's definitely proof of the lunar landing, because how do you know that that's Apollo 12 if they don't say so? Oh, they do say so. It's Apollo 12.
We have spy satellites that can pick up newspaper headlines.
Yes, and you get commercial satellites that will sell you photographs of any place on Earth. And I happened to use one that showed the London Eye, because it's a very well-known landmark. And in that photograph, you could see cars parked in the car park nearby. And you can tell if the car has got a sunroof or not. And that's only 3 foot across. And it's in colour. And that's not. And that was taken from 20 miles away. And that's all they can show. Which is why I say that it's photoshopped.
So, out of interest, I wonder how high the satellite that was going around the moon was. So, if the Earth one is 20 miles, I wonder how many miles the moon one was.
Well, the normal orbit height above the lunar surface, if you've got an orbiting satellite, is 60 miles.
Right.
But you can adjust the height of the orbit, and they brought it down to, I think they said it was 25 kilometers. The 25 kilometers is just short of 20 miles, about 16, 18 miles. If you're orbiting the Earth, you're flying anywhere up to 400 miles, because obviously the lower you are, the faster you're traveling, and therefore you're going to blur the photograph. So the ideal height to photograph Earth is about 400 miles, which is where the commercial satellites fly.
Yeah.
So, wait a second. So, how high was this? They're supposed to be orbiting the Earth around about 25 miles.
No. Orbiting the moon.
I'm sorry, the moon at 25 miles.
Yeah, orbiting the moon. That's the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which was launched in 2009 to re-photograph the lunar surface yet again. You'd think they'd have got enough by now, but obviously not. So, from 25 kilometers above orbit height above the lunar surface, that was the photograph they obtained, that NASA obtained, and then put out to say, look, there are the landing sites. We landed on the moon. That's their proof. And that's, if you ask anybody who supports NASA, what proof do you have we landed on the moon? Well, the photographs show it. And these are the photographs they claim. Now, if you look at the photographs in detail, well, it doesn't show any detail. You can't look at them in detail. Because all you've got is a couple of pixels. Even if you enlarge the pixels.
And to answer, if you're enlarging the pixels and it doesn't come out, it means that it was taken in extraordinarily low resolution in the first place. And to answer your question which you asked, Andrew, spy satellites are at a minimum of 100 miles, and they can read your newspaper.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's instant bullshit.
Yeah,
What's
exactly.
really interesting,
and that's the atmosphere as well.
But these photographs showing the Apollo landing site are what most people who support NASA claim as being definitive proof, which obviously is not a very scientifically accurate way of describing it.
No.
And it doesn't look very hilly, Marcus. You know, one of the things that Peter was talking about was like the hills, wasn't it? Like the different angles being taken.
Yes.
Because to me, I mean, it's slightly difficult to see.
In fact, that particular explanation for why the photographs appear to be taken from different heights is taken directly from Jay Windley's website, clavius.org,
Right.
Yeah.
which is where most people get their information. And if you hear people quoting it, which is what Peter Bassett was doing, he was quoting from that website. And then I was deconstructing it, because what he's saying is incorrect. He didn't like it at all. He got very upset and reported you to Ofcom. Which is the sort of thing that happens.
It's kind of like throwing your toys out the pram, really, isn't it?
Well, exactly. Yeah, throwing your toys out of the pram. And now Peter's getting all excited. He's going to produce his book again. And he's going to get his website up and running again. And he'll repeat all these things again. And people will believe it.
Well, you got to remember, this is like modern Jesus.
Yes.
It's religious. It's a religious movement.
It's like I think you're right. I think science, like mainstream science, has almost become a cult. It's almost become like a cult.
Hasn't almost become a cult. It is a cult. 100% a cult.
Thank you for that. That's a very good description. I'm glad you said that.
This is the reason why I don't like. I have very few conversations like this with any scientist. Because
you're in good company, Colin. You're in good company.
You're being recorded.
Scott, out of interest, have you come up against any NASA people? You must have done in your research, and have you stumped them? Have you made them think, I can't really answer that, and then they scuppered off somewhere?
I have an entire list of emails I sent out to people.
I thought you might do.
with my questions, and I usually send them a wet flag, and I've got maybe 3, I think, or 4, and a few people that were attacking Marcus. One guy was a mathematician, and he's going to tell me about the fuel numbers, and that's just not going to happen because the lander itself doesn't have enough. Even the quadrants aren't large enough to hold the fuel.
that was the one.
You take a look at a propane tank here on Earth.
Yeah.
Okay, 500 gallon tank is 10 feet long, 38 inches wide, like in diameter. Okay, they only had 60 inches high, and they're 51-inch squares, and then you got to take a foot off of that, just for the micromedia shielding, and then there's more space which is undefined for the insulation. So even if you bring it down to 38 inches down there or 40 inches down there, you need twice as many tanks.
Am I right in thinking that the Russians actually did the mathematics on this, and they worked out that the Saturn couldn't actually launch? they couldn't launch that payload into space.
Of course not.
Yeah. I think the Russians actually confirmed that they ran by all the measurements, dimensions, the mathematics, and they said you couldn't get that payload into space using those dimensions.
That's something I was thinking about a couple of days ago, because I was looking at Falcon 9, is it? SpaceX.
Oh, you were telling me about that, yeah.
Yeah, and they were talking about exactly the same thing. They were talking about the problems they have with payloads and the reason why the engines are so large, and etc. So, and the other one was, I watched a video on the fact that the Americans actually had to take Russian technology for their rockets. You can actually look into that. There's Russian rockets which they use. Because the Russians have better rocket technology and better thrust per pound.
Mm.
So when you start looking into that, that's a really good one. When you start looking into the engine, and the size, the amount of fuel they carried, the amount of energy they had to do anything, that completely fails. They weren't able to do it. There's a lot of things which just don't make sense. They don't actually physically make sense.
But then, but Colin, if that is the case, and you obviously are familiar with a lot of scientists who would understand the details behind it, why do they still deny what is in front of them?
Because it's a religion, it's a cult. In the same way, it's in the same way as anything is a cult. You could stick the proof in their face. You could actually make them eat the proof. They could live the proof, and they'll still deny it because it's what's inbuilt into it. It's indoctrinated, and it's a mixture of I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to give up on something which I've spent my whole life believing. I've got my peers who are going to shout me down. There's 101 things, and also it's one of those things that if you've used that as a basis of truth, suddenly you're being lied to by your government, you're being lied to by everybody you know, and people don't want to live in a lie. They would rather just keep repeating the same mantra over and over again rather than change. That's more of a psychological thing rather than anything else.
That's true. So what was it that changed your viewpoint?
I never believed it in the first place.
Ah.
I don't believe anything which the government says. I don't believe anything on TV because I was just one of those children. I watched too many cartoons, and the thing is that if you actually watch cartoons, they actually tell you things to your face because they're assuming that children are watching the beautiful bright colours and they're not actually listening to what's going on. But there's a lot of information in cartoons. They will tell you blatantly to your face, by the way, that failed and that doesn't work, and people say, they laugh and they carry on with what they're doing. Even things like Tom and Jerry, etc. There's a lot of social information with them. And so as a young child, I was already, I've always been anti-everything since I was around about 7 years old. It's also the fact that I came from a scientific family. So half the time my parents used to tell me that that's incorrect and they'll show me the reason why they handed me a book. And so by the time I was 8, 9, 10, by that time I'm already telling my teachers that that's not right. and the thing is that Andrew could tell you see that a lot in my Facebook where I go, ha! I told you that 20 years ago! and people who went to school with me go, yeah, okay, Colin. The thing is that there's loads of things. People are watching them fall apart one by one. It's only recently because we're able to disseminate information so fast that people are beginning to realise what's going on. But a lot of this information is in books. I knew a lot of this information before the internet because I used to read. I used to go to the library. I used to watch things. But a lot of people didn't. So a lot of this is new to them. So sort of wow. But to me, it's like, well, that was a bit obvious.
That's a good point.
I think we're going to have to draw this to a close because it's getting pretty tired here in the UK. I don't know where Ben's gone. He's just left a message saying he's off for a minute, but he hasn't come back. I did send him a little text to say, come on, Ben, we're going to draw this to a close. But I think he's... I don't know.
I just put these two up. The final thing. That's one of the first images of the LEM on the right there. And just as far as the fuel tanks, here's an artist's conception of how much fuel there needs to be to land, right? Based on fuel numbers.
Yeah.
Right? Compared to any image you see of the Apollo lander.
Yeah, one on the right looks like something from some kind of kitsch 1950s B movie.
That's a wood-fired model. You can see the smoke stacks.
Yeah, that's...
It's also it's about a third of the amount of capacity, isn't it? If you look at the size of the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I put it up there to show the different... That's around 1961 or something like that. 62.
Colin, if, as we're kind of like wrapping things up, is there any other big clangers that you want to kind of mention as to why Apollo is just bollocks?
Suits. The spacesuits.
Elaborate.
Oh God, there's quite a few different things, you know. Movement. movability in it.
Because it'd be pressurised, wouldn't it? So it'd be extremely difficult to move.
Yeah, so it's either pressurised or it's going to have rings on it.
Mm.
And if you look at if you go through the suits over the decades, the suit just doesn't hold up. Especially now when you look at when they're talking about doing the actual real going to the moon and going to Mars, the suit design is totally different. And that's the reason why, because they wouldn't be able to do what they were doing in those suits. You also got the thing of the amount, having the astronauts within the capsule, the amount of space they'll have, having 3 astronauts in the capsule with their suits still on, with their packs on, etc.
Yeah.
You've got getting in and out of the lander with the suits on. There's a lot of things which the suits cause a problem, and it's another area of contention.
Mm. Marcus, how many times did they get in and out wearing their suits of the lunar lander? Remind me. It's gone off.
Depends which mission it was. I know that they got out once for the Apollo 11 thing, which was just for a couple of hours, and on the very last mission, Apollo 17, with Gene Cernan and Harrison Smith, who was the geologist, they spent like 3 days there. So they must have got out quite a fair few times, but I don't know the exact number of extra kind of lunar activities they did.
And each time they would have been pressurising, repressurising, and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
Apollo 15 had a stand-up EVA where they went out the top hatch.
That's right. They look out, supposedly, just to see if it's safe.
4 decompression cycles. Apollo 11 had 2 because they forgot to throw the cameras out after they repressurized, so they opened it back up again and threw the cameras out in the PLSSs.
Oxygen. So that brings you on to the next one, which is oxygen. Because every time they compress and decompress, it's a lot of oxygen.
Yeah, it is.
And you're not getting that back. That's the most.
That's gone. You can say goodbye to that. Yeah.
So nobody's really thought about that, because you're talking about the amount of space for fuel, but then you've got to take in the amount of space for oxygen, including depressurizing and depressurizing.
One thing we were talking about earlier, Colin, is that why is it that scuba divers have only 45 minutes of air in their tanks?
I was just about to say that next. And the other one was about 3 days. You're supposed to be on the planet for 3 days. That's what I'm about to talk about. You don't have 3 days worth of goddamn oxygen in that thing. Here's the thing. It just doesn't make sense. There's no capacity for them to put anything. It just doesn't make sense. And then it comes back down to, if they do have the capacity, think about the weight. Which then brings you back to the rocket. It doesn't make sense. They don't balance. If it was an equation, your teacher would slap you across the face and tell you to go do your homework. It doesn't balance. It just doesn't work.
And Marcus, isn't there something where the hatch where they exited each time after repressurization, the packs wouldn't even fit through or barely fit through anyway?
Dude, that's exactly.
Yeah, exactly, because when I think it was Jim Collier who went to one of the museums where they had, I think it was a lunar lander model display, and he was trying to measure the dimensions of the door through which the astronauts came out of the lander, and he found that it was, I think, 30 inches across, 30 inches square. And then he measured the spacesuit, and it was 30 inches. So they were having a real problem getting out. In fact, given that they would be slightly inflated, or probably quite a lot inflated, they probably couldn't get out.
And and they're dead.
Yeah. Would you risk that if you're the designer of the suits and the lander? Would you risk that kind of tightness?
No, of course you wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't. And also, if you look at the diameter of the hole through which they travelled from the command module into the lander, it's a tube. It's a circular tube, which measures 24 inches across. Once you've removed the mechanism which joined the two craft together, and you put it somewhere safe because you'd need it to have it when you separated. If they were in their spacesuits when they moved from the lunar module, from the command module into the lunar module, it was too small for them to fit through. So they had to go through without wearing their spacesuit, which was stored in the lunar lander, which meant they had to pressurize the lunar lander before they got into it. How did they do that? Was it remote control? Because those spacesuits are quite difficult to get into. We've seen film of astronauts being kitted out. It takes 2 people to help them get into their spacesuit.
I'll also just say before we close is that when they come down on splashdown in the blue jumpsuits, and you wonder how they do that if they're re-entering the Earth's atmosphere at God knows how many miles per hour.
You want to know the answer to that? They've got a trouser press in there.
Well, of course, yeah. A steam iron explaining that they obviously ironed the wet flag as well, you see, before they put it out. Right,
it's the G's. The G's just flatten out their clothes.
Ed, we're about to wrap up. I think you need to wrap the show up.
Okay.
I'll let Marcus look after the last 2 images.
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's kind. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I was just going to say, you mentioned the Russian investigation into whether a Saturn rocket could actually do what we were told it did. The article about that exact subject, written by a Russian physicist, is on the Owlis website, which is on the left-hand picture.
Owlis.com, very interesting website.
Yeah, Owlis.com. Worth going on to there because it's got a lot of stuff from the Russian side as well. And we've also got the description of the Russian filmmakers who deconstructed the Mythbusters program. It showed it was complete fake. And the picture on the right, nexusmagazine.com, if you want to have a look at it. It's the world's top-selling alternative news magazine. And I distribute it in the UK and Europe, and very proud to do so. Been doing it for 25 years now. Still not bored with it. There's even more exciting information in it. So magic mushrooms is our subject of choice in the current issue. I'm interested in a magic mushroom and what it does, and it's a spectacular plant. Check it out. But thank you very much indeed for the invitation to appear on the Peep Show and on the Hapanwu TV show. Much appreciated.
Thank you for being on. It's really great to talk to you again, and thanks for all the information. And I agree, Nexus. I've been reading it now since about 1995 or so, and I concur. It's an excellent read, and I do recommend it. And so, Marcus, thanks very much, and also to Scott Henderson, and a new face on the scene.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, Scott is a mine of information. And as we've already seen tonight, mention a photograph and he can find it.
It's been absolutely. I've been studying this subject for a long time now. In fact, this is kind of what got me into this scene. However, I've come across a lot of new information this evening, and I'm really, really grateful. It's been a real marathon epic show, and I hope the reviewers get a lot out of it too. And so thanks to Scott, and of course to Paranormal Peep Show's hosts, Neil Geddes-Ward and Andrew Chaplin.
Thank you,
guys.
And a massive thank you for you, Ben, for organising this. For Scott for bringing the visuals up, which are absolutely brilliant. It's so good to actually see visuals as well as talking, because we can talk to the cows come home, but to see visuals is amazing. And of course, thanks to Colin, which was very, very last minute, but very, very fruitful for me and for you as well. I'm sure, Neil, this has been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
One of the best interviews that we've done, actually.
Yeah, I will renew my subscription now to the Sunday Sport and read it in a different light.
Of course, last but not least, Colin, I wasn't going to leave you out, Colin. You've joined us late, halfway through the show, but I'll tell you what, you've really given us an awful lot to think about. Again, completely new perspective for me, and thank you very, very much indeed.
Great. All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Good night.
Brilliant. Good night.
Hospital Port as pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order.
It's being stopped at the moment. Check out QAnon. There you go.
Yes. Where we go one, we go all.